At a family dinner, my son and his wife said they needed my 5-bedroom house for their new baby and told me to move into a tiny retirement condo. I simply gave a faint smile, took a sip of my iced tea, and coldly replied, "Why is that my responsibility?" The whole dining room fell dead silent. But when my daughter-in-law pulled pre-drawn deed transfer papers out of her designer bag, I realized this was not a simple request. It was a coordinated ambush. My name is Gloria. I am 62 years old, and I recently learned that the hardest boundaries you ever have to draw are the ones with your own flesh and blood. I spent my entire career navigating corporate sharks as a chief financial officer, but nothing prepared me for the greed sitting at my own dining table. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to entitled family members who severely underestimated your intelligence and your strength. It was a typical Sunday afternoon after church in our quiet, upscale neighborhood in Atlanta. The weather was perfect, and the sun was shining through the large bay windows of my living room. I had been up since 6 in the morning, preparing a traditional family dinner. The rich aroma of baked macaroni and cheese, candied yams, slow-roasted pot roast, and garlic green beans filled the entire house. I took immense pride in my home. It was a beautiful, sprawling 5-bedroom brick property that my late husband and I purchased 20 years ago. We worked tirelessly to pay off the mortgage early. When he passed away 5 years ago, this house became my sanctuary. It was where I felt closest to him and where I hosted every major holiday and Sunday dinner to keep our family united. Sitting around my large custom mahogany dining table were the people I loved most, or at least the people I thought I knew. There was my 32-year-old son Marcus, my 30-year-old daughter-in-law Chloe, my 34-year-old daughter Jasmine, and my 75-year-old Aunt Loretta. Marcus had always been the golden child in our extended family. From the moment he was born, Aunt Loretta and my late husband placed him on a pedestal. He was a handsome, charismatic boy who grew into a man accustomed to having every obstacle removed from his path. He currently worked as a mid-level manager, but lived like a chief executive officer, constantly buying luxury watches and leasing cars he could barely afford. Sitting next to him was Chloe, his wife of 3 years. Chloe came from a middle-class white family, but she had adopted what the internet calls a soft life aesthetic. She refused to work a traditional job, preferring to run a failing luxury spa that Marcus funded. She spent the first 20 minutes of our dinner taking aesthetically pleasing photos of her plate for her social media followers, completely ignoring the conversation around her. Across from them sat my daughter Jasmine. Jasmine was the exact opposite of Marcus. She was a fiercely independent, hard-working veterinarian who paid her own way through medical school. Despite her success, our extended family frequently marginalized her simply because she was a single woman without children. Aunt Loretta never missed an opportunity to remind Jasmine that her degrees could not keep her warm at night. We were just finishing up our plates, and I was about to serve the homemade peach cobbler when Marcus clinked his heavy crystal glass with a silver spoon. He stood up slightly, smoothing down his expensive linen shirt. "Mom, Aunt Loretta, Jasmine, Chloe, and I have some amazing news," he announced with a wide, blinding smile. "We are pregnant. We are finally having a baby." The table erupted in genuine cheers. Jasmine jumped out of her seat to hug her younger brother, her face lighting up with joy. Aunt Loretta clapped her hands together, praising the Lord loudly. I felt a deep, overwhelming surge of happiness. A grandchild was a blessing I had been praying for. I walked over and kissed Chloe on the cheek, congratulating them both warmly. For a brief, beautiful moment, everything felt perfect. But that celebration was incredibly short-lived. Marcus cleared his throat and sat back down, exchanging a very deliberate, highly calculated look with Chloe. She nodded encouragingly, resting her hand over his and giving it a firm squeeze. It was a silent signal between them. "So, Mom?" Marcus started leaning forward and resting his elbows heavily on the lace table runner. "With the new baby coming, we have been doing a lot of thinking about the future and about our living situation. A baby needs space to grow. Our luxury condo downtown is just too cramped. We need a large yard, a good school district, and a real family home to raise your grandchild properly." I smiled casually, nodding along as I began collecting the empty dinner plates. That makes perfect sense, son. Real estate is always a great investment for a growing family. Have you guys started looking at houses out in the suburbs yet? Chloe let out a breathy little condescending laugh, as if I had just told a naive joke to a child. Well, Gloria, she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. We actually wanted to talk to you specifically about that. We were looking at the housing market, and the current interest rates are just absolutely ridiculous right now. It does not make any financial sense for us to take on a massive new mortgage when we are trying to build our soft life and focus on the baby. I stopped stacking the plates and stood up straight. I raised a single eyebrow, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my iced tea. So what exactly is your plan then? Marcus looked me dead in the eye without a single ounce of shame. We want this house, Mom. It is a massive 5-bedroom house. You are living here all alone. It is way too much space and way too much upkeep for one retired woman to maintain. We figured you could sell us the house for a nominal fee or simply transfer the deed. You can move into one of those nice little retirement condos near the golf course and we can take over this property to raise the baby. It just makes the most sense for the family. I slowly lowered my glass, placing it exactly in the center of the coaster. I looked at Marcus, then I looked at Chloe, then I looked at Aunt Loretta, who was nodding her head in vigorous, enthusiastic agreement. They had discussed this beforehand. This was not a spontaneous idea. This was a coordinated, calculated ambush in my own dining room. I did not yell. I did not cry. I simply gave a faint, chilling smile, leaned back in my chair, and coldly replied, "Why is that my responsibility?" The whole room fell dead silent. You could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. The sudden shift in my tone caught them completely off guard. Chloe lost her fake sweet smile instantly. Her face hardened and she shifted in her seat. "Excuse me," she said, her voice taking on a sharp and highly disrespectful tone. "Gloria, this is about generational wealth. It is about setting up your future grandchild for success. My parents always say that grandparents should happily sacrifice for the new generation. That is what families do. Are you really going to be that selfish and hoard a giant 5-bedroom house while your only son struggles to provide adequate space for your grandchild?" Before I could even address the sheer audacity of a daughter-in-law trying to evict me from a home she did not contribute a single dime to, Aunt Loretta slammed her wrinkled hand flat on the table, causing the silverware to rattle. "Gloria, you need to stop acting like a stubborn, bitter old mule," Aunt Loretta scolded me, her voice trembling with misplaced righteous anger. "Since your husband passed away, Marcus is the man of the family now. He is the head of the household. He needs to lead this family, and to do that he needs a proper estate. You are just an older widow now. What do you possibly need with a big empty house? It is a waste of a good property. You should be happy and honored to step aside for your son." Jasmine, who had been sitting quietly in absolute shock, finally found her voice. "Are you all completely out of your minds?" Jasmine yelled, standing up from her chair. "You cannot just demand that Mom give up her house. She worked her entire life to pay for this house. She built this life from the ground up. Marcus, if you want a house for your wife and your baby, you need to go to the bank and buy one yourself, just like everyone else does." Marcus turned his anger toward his sister, sneering with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Shut up, Jasmine," Marcus snapped viciously. "Just because you are single, childless, and alone does not mean you understand what it takes to build a family legacy. You do not have a husband or a child, so you have no say in this. This is grown folk business." I felt a cold, dangerous rage bubbling deep in my chest, but I kept my face entirely impassive. I spent 35 years in corporate boardrooms, negotiating with ruthless executives and hostile takeover specialists. I was certainly not going to let a spoiled 32-year-old boy and his entitled wife bully me in the very home I paid for. I looked right at Chloe, my eyes locking onto hers with a deadpan stare. "Let me be very clear so there is no confusion moving forward. This house belongs to me. It does not belong to Marcus. It does not belong to you. It does not belong to the baby. And I have absolutely no intention of leaving my home today, tomorrow, or any day in the foreseeable future." Chloe narrowed her eyes, her jaw clenching tight. She aggressively unzipped her expensive designer handbag. She reached inside and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of legally bound papers. She slapped them down and slid them across the smooth mahogany table until they stopped right in front of my dinner plate. "We anticipated you might be a little difficult and emotional about this transition," Gloria Chloe said, with a chillingly calm and arrogant voice. "But we already had a lawyer draft the deed transfer. All you have to do is sign on the dotted line. It is for the good of the family." I looked down at the thick stack of legal documents resting next to my plate of peach cobbler. The crisp white paper felt like a profound insult against the warm mahogany of my dining table. Chloe sat there with her perfectly manicured hands folded expectantly, while Marcus looked at me with the entitled impatience of a child waiting for a toy. They honestly believed I would just pick up a pen and sign away the home I had spent 3 decades building. I slowly pushed the papers back across the table until they bumped against Chloe's designer handbag. "I told you both very clearly I am not signing anything," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of the emotional outburst they were clearly hoping to provoke. "This is my home, and it will remain my home until the day I decide otherwise." Aunt Loretta slammed her hand against the table so hard her water glass tipped over, spilling ice across the lace table runner. "Are you out of your mind, Gloria?" she screamed, her face twisting into a mask of pure indignation. "How can you sit there and be such a bitter old woman? Your son is sitting right here begging you for a proper foundation to raise your own grandchild, and you are clutching onto these empty walls like a greedy dragon. You have always been this way ever since you got that fancy corporate job. You think you are better than family. You think your money makes you a queen." I did not even blink at her sudden explosion. Aunt Loretta had spent her entire life worshiping the men in our family while treating the women like second-class citizens. She enabled my late husband's worst habits, and she had spent the last 32 years doing the exact same thing for Marcus. She was the one who told him he did not need to get a summer job in high school because he was the man of the house. She was the one who slipped him money behind my back when I tried to teach him financial responsibility. And now she was sitting at my table eating the food I bought and cooked, demanding I render myself homeless to satisfy his latest whim. I let her yell until her chest heaved with the effort, refusing to give her the satisfaction of an argument. Jasmine could not stay silent any longer. She pushed her chair back violently, the wooden legs scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Aunt Loretta, you need to stop right now," Jasmine demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Mom does not owe Marcus a single thing. He is a grown man with a job and a wife. If they want a house, they can save up for a down payment and buy one just like I did when I bought my veterinary clinic. You cannot just bully Mom into giving away her life savings because Marcus refuses to live within his means." Marcus turned his full attention toward his sister, and the look in his eyes was so profoundly cruel it made my stomach turn. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms and looking Jasmine up and down with open disgust. "Oh, listen to the successful veterinarian," he mocked, his voice dripping with venom. "You think because you fix broken dogs all day that makes you an authority on family. You are 34 years old, Jasmine. You are single. You live alone with a cat and you have no prospects. You do not know the first thing about building a generational legacy because you are never going to have one. You are just jealous because I am the one carrying on the family name while you are going to end up a lonely old spinster. You have no skin in this game, so sit down and keep your mouth shut." Hearing my son speak to my daughter that way was the final straw. The corporate composure I had maintained up until that point began to crack, revealing the fierce, protective mother underneath. I stood up, planting both of my hands firmly on the table, and leaned toward Marcus. "Do not ever speak to your sister that way in my house," I commanded, my voice dropping an octave, carrying the absolute authority I used to reserve for hostile boardrooms. "Jasmine has built a life she can be proud of through her own hard work, which is a lot more than I can say for you right now. You come into my home, eat my food, disrespect my daughter, and try to steal my property under the guise of family. You are acting like a spoiled child who has been told no for the very first time." That was when Chloe decided to deploy her ultimate weapon. As soon as she realized they were losing control of the narrative and that I was not going to break down and yield, she suddenly gasped loudly, clutching her chest. Her face crumpled, and she began hyperventilating, forcing huge, dramatic tears from her eyes. "I cannot breathe," she sobbed, leaning heavily into Marcus and gripping his shirt. Marcus, my stomach hurts. The stress is too much. It is bad for the baby. She is doing this on purpose, Marcus. She wants to hurt the baby. It was a masterful performance worthy of a daytime soap opera. She wailed, clutching her perfectly flat stomach while shooting daggers at me through her fake tears. Marcus immediately jumped into action, playing the role of the valiantly protective husband. He wrapped his arms around Chloe, glaring at me with a hatred that chilled me to the bone. "Look what you are doing to my pregnant wife," he yelled, completely ignoring the fact that they were the ones who ambushed me. "You are a miserable mother, Gloria. You have always cared more about your money and your precious house than you ever cared about me. I hope you enjoy living in this massive house all by yourself because you are never going to see this child. We are done here." He grabbed the stack of legal papers, shoved them aggressively back into Chloe's bag, and practically dragged her toward the front door. Aunt Loretta scrambled to follow them, loudly proclaiming that I would face divine judgment for turning my back on my only son. She stopped at the doorway, pointing a trembling finger at me, telling me I would die alone and unloved before slamming the heavy front door shut behind her. The sudden silence that fell over the house was deafening. The smell of the Sunday dinner still hung in the air, but the warmth of the home had been entirely sucked out, leaving nothing but a cold, bitter reality in its wake. Jasmine helped me load the dishwasher, her movements slow and defeated. We stood in the kitchen in silence for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. "I am sorry, Mom," Jasmine finally whispered, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I never wanted to ruin Sunday dinner. I just could not sit there and let them treat you like a disposable asset." I looked at my brilliant, capable daughter and felt a surge of immense pride mixed with a deep sorrow. "You have absolutely nothing to apologize for, Jasmine," I told her firmly, handing her a towel. "You spoke the truth, and in this family, the truth has always been treated like an act of war. Marcus has been protected from the real world his entire life, and now that his poor financial choices are catching up to him, he is desperately looking for someone to bail him out. But it will not be me, not this time." Later that night, I was sitting alone in my dark living room, staring blankly at the television. My phone, which was resting on the coffee table, began to buzz endlessly. It vibrated so violently it slowly inched its way across the glass surface. It started with a long, venomous text message from Chloe's mother, Susan. The message was paragraph after paragraph of passive-aggressive judgment, accusing me of causing her daughter undue emotional distress and threatening to keep the unborn baby away from me forever. She claimed that in her family, grandparents joyfully sacrificed everything for their children and that my behavior was highly toxic. I did not bother replying to a woman who happily funded her daughter's extravagant lifestyle while judging me for protecting my own retirement. Then came the messages from my cousins, my nieces, and my nephews. Aunt Loretta had clearly gone on a ruthless smear campaign, calling every single member of our extended family to tell them a completely fabricated story. According to her version of events, I had viciously attacked my pregnant daughter-in-law, verbally abused my son, and threw them out on the street without any provocation. The text messages called me selfish, cruel, unnatural, and warned me that I would regret my actions when I was old and sick. I simply turned the volume down and watched the screen light up in the dark, refusing to engage with their manufactured outrage. I knew that replying would only give them the drama they were so desperately craving. I was just about to turn the phone completely off and go to sleep when a different notification popped up on the screen. It was an urgent text message, but it was not from an angry relative. It was an automated fraud alert from my primary bank. I picked up the phone, my heart suddenly beating a little faster in my chest. I stared at the glowing letters on the screen, reading the words over and over again until the true severity of the situation finally settled in. The message read, "Alert attempted withdrawal of $50,000 from your joint account. Please verify this transaction immediately." I felt the blood drain completely from my face, leaving me cold and utterly numb. I had not authorized a withdrawal of $50,000, or any amount for that matter, and the only other person whose name had ever been loosely associated with that specific account was Marcus. It was an old college fund account I had opened for him when he was a teenager to help him manage his expenses. I had restricted his access years ago when I caught him spending his tuition money on luxury car parts, but clearly his name was still lingering in the banking system as an authorized user. The terrifying realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. He had not just come to dinner to ask for the deed to the house. That was only plan A. He had come to dinner knowing exactly what he was doing. He needed a distraction. While he was sitting in my dining room smiling in my face and eating the food I cooked, he was simultaneously trying to empty my life savings. He was going to take absolutely everything from me, and he was willing to destroy our family to do it. The morning sun brought absolutely no comfort as it filtered through my bedroom window. I had not slept a single wink. The fraud alert from the bank was burned into my memory, playing on a constant agonizing loop in my mind. Attempted withdrawal of $50,000. My own flesh and blood. My only son had sat at my dining table eating the meal I spent hours cooking, all while attempting to drain my life savings. I got out of bed, put on a sharp-tailored navy blue suit, and drove straight to my primary bank downtown. I did not shed a single tear. Crying was for women who had no options, and as a former chief financial officer, I always had options. I walked into the grand marble lobby of the bank right as the doors opened at 9 in the morning. I bypassed the standard teller line entirely and went straight to the private office of my personal wealth manager, David. David had been managing my accounts for over 15 years. He took one look at my face and immediately knew something was severely wrong. I sat down in the plush leather chair across from his mahogany desk and slid my phone toward him. "I need you to explain exactly what happened with this alert," I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of any emotion. David pulled up my master file on his computer, his brow furrowing in deep concentration. He typed rapidly for a few moments before letting out a heavy sigh. "Gloria, someone attempted an online wire transfer last night at exactly 7 in the evening," he explained, keeping his eyes on the screen. The request was initiated using an old routing number linked to the joint educational trust account you set up for Marcus back in 2010. I closed my eyes and took a very deep breath, feeling a sharp pang of betrayal stabbing directly through my chest. 7 in the evening. That was the exact moment Marcus was looking me dead in the eye and demanding I sign over the deed to my house. He had perfectly orchestrated the entire evening to keep me distracted. He brought his pregnant wife over and started a massive fight about real estate, hoping I would be too emotionally exhausted to check my financial notifications. He thought he was incredibly smart. But my son was acting with the desperate arrogance of a man who did not understand how real wealth actually worked. He forgot one crucial detail about that specific account. Years ago, when Marcus graduated from college, he had roughly $50,000 left over in that educational trust. I told him to use that money to pay off the remaining balance of his student loans and put the rest toward a down payment on a starter home. Instead, he completely ignored my advice and bought a brand new luxury Porsche. He drove it straight to my house, grinning from ear to ear, expecting me to be proud of his flashy new purchase. I did not yell at him that day either. I simply walked inside, called David, and completely revoked his access to every single dime of my money. I removed his name as an authorized user and transferred the remaining funds into a secure high-yield account under my exclusive control. The ghost account he tried to access last night was nothing more than an empty shell with an obsolete routing number. David looked at me with a mixture of professional concern and deep sympathy. The system automatically flagged the transaction and blocked it because his credentials have been expired for 5 years, David said softly. He tried to process the wire transfer 3 separate times before the system permanently locked the portal and sent you the emergency fraud alert. Would you like me to contact the authorities regarding this attempted theft? I sat there in silence, processing the sheer magnitude of my son's betrayal. He was not just entitled and spoiled. He was completely willing to steal from his own mother to fund his fabricated lifestyle. "No, do not involve the police just yet," I told David, smoothing out an imaginary wrinkle on my suit pants. I need to see exactly how far he is willing to go before I drop the hammer. But I want you to put the highest level of security on every single asset I own. Freeze everything that requires a secondary authorization, and ensure that my name is the only one capable of moving even a single penny." David nodded quickly, executing the security protocols across my entire portfolio. After finalizing the paperwork, I thanked him and walked out of the private office feeling a strange sense of absolute clarity. The mourning period for the son I thought I had was officially over. Now I was operating purely on business. I walked across the polished marble floor of the bank lobby, heading toward the main exit. But just as I reached the heavy glass doors, a sharp, familiar voice called out my name, echoing through the quiet building. "Well, if it is not the woman of the hour," the voice chirped with an unbearable layer of fake sweetness. I stopped and slowly turned around. Standing near the premium teller line was Susan, the mother of my daughter-in-law, Chloe. Susan was a wealthy white woman who spent most of her time at country clubs and charity galas, judging everyone who did not fit into her narrow worldview. She was dressed in an expensive beige cashmere sweater, set her blonde hair styled in stiff, perfect waves. She walked over to me carrying a designer leather tote bag, sporting a massive, condescending smile that did not quite reach her cold eyes. "Good morning, Susan," I said, keeping my tone polite but incredibly distant. "I was not expecting to run into you today. I am just running some errands for the country club charity drive," she replied, waving her hand dismissively. "I heard all about the little family disagreement last night. Chloe called me absolutely sobbing. You know, Gloria, I have to admit I was genuinely shocked by your behavior. I truly thought you were a more supportive mother." I stood perfectly still, letting her words wash over me without reacting. "I understand that cultures are different," Susan continued, tilting her head and giving me a look of profound false pity. "But in our family, we believe that grandparents should happily sacrifice for the new generation." When Chloe and Marcus got married, Richard and I practically funded their entire wedding. We believe in setting our children up for success, not holding them back out of pure selfishness. It is just such a shame that you refuse to help them secure their future, especially with a precious new baby on the way. She placed her hand on her chest, looking at me as if I were a poor lost soul who desperately needed her superior guidance. I looked right back at her, keeping my expression completely unreadable. My silence seemed to make her slightly uncomfortable because she quickly shifted her weight and let out a small, breathy laugh. "Well, it is a good thing Marcus is such a resourceful and hard-working young man," Susan added, her tone dripping with an unearned sense of smug victory. "He knows how to take care of his pregnant wife even when his own mother turns her back on him. He found another way to secure their financial future and get the space they need for the baby." I raised one eyebrow, mostly entertained by her supreme arrogance. "Is that right?" I asked smoothly. "And what is his brilliant new plan?" Susan leaned in a little closer, dropping her voice as if she were sharing an exclusive secret. "They are taking out a massive second mortgage on their luxury condo downtown," she whispered proudly. "Marcus spoke to a private lender this morning. They are going to use the equity from their condo to buy a beautiful new house in the suburbs all on their own. They will not be needing your old house or your permission after all. They are completely independent, and we are just so incredibly proud of them." I stared at Susan as she beamed with pride, completely oblivious to the massive financial bomb she had just dropped right into my lap. She honestly believed that Marcus and Chloe were independent, wealthy adults who were making smart real estate moves. I felt a slow, cold smile creeping up the sides of my face, but I kept it completely internalized. "Good for them," I said softly, my voice smooth as silk. "I am sure that second mortgage will work out exactly the way they planned." Susan smiled triumphantly and walked toward the exit, completely unaware that I was the actual silent owner of that specific luxury condo, and her beloved son-in-law was walking straight into an absolute financial disaster. 2 days after the disastrous Sunday dinner and the horrifying discovery of the attempted bank transfer, I received a phone call from Chloe's father, Richard. His tone was perfectly measured, dripping with the kind of practiced cordiality that wealthy men use when they are trying to manipulate a situation. He invited me to lunch at his exclusive country club, claiming he and Susan wanted to act as peacemakers. He said they wanted to bridge the gap between the two families before the new baby arrived. I knew instantly that it was a trap, but I agreed to go anyway because, in the world of high-stakes finance, you always let your opponents reveal their entire hand before you make your final move. I arrived at the sprawling estate of the country club exactly on time. The property was heavily guarded with manicured green lawns and luxury cars lining the circular driveway. I handed my keys to the valet and walked through the heavy oak doors, feeling the cold air conditioning rush over my skin. I was dressed impeccably in a tailored emerald green dress and a string of authentic pearls, projecting the image of a woman who was completely unbothered by family drama. The hostess guided me through the dining room past tables of wealthy retirees and local politicians to a private booth overlooking the pristine 18th hole of the golf course. Richard and Susan were already seated sipping sparkling water with fresh lemon wedges. Richard stood up the moment he saw me offering a stiff, practiced smile and extending his hand. He was a tall man with silver hair and an expensive linen suit, projecting an aura of old money and unearned authority. Susan sat beside him, wearing another one of her beige cashmere outfits, her neck adorned with a heavy diamond pendant. "Thank you so much for coming, Gloria," Richard said, his voice booming slightly too loud for the quiet dining room. "We know tensions have been incredibly high lately, and we just want to find a reasonable path forward for the children." I took my seat gracefully, resting my leather handbag on the empty chair beside me. I skipped the pleasantries entirely. "Let us get straight to the point, Richard," I said, keeping my voice calm and completely level. "You did not invite me to this country club to talk about the weather or to smooth things over. You are a businessman and I am a businesswoman. Tell me exactly what it is you are trying to sell me today." Richard let out a loud, hearty laugh, attempting to brush off my directness, as if it were a charming quirk rather than a clear boundary. "Well, I always appreciate a woman who gets straight to the point," Richard replied, leaning forward and folding his hands on the crisp white tablecloth. Susan smiled tightly beside him, taking a small sip of her water. "Gloria, we all know that Marcus and Chloe need a proper home for the baby. They simply cannot raise our grandchild in a cramped downtown condo. We also know that you are currently living alone in a massive 5-bedroom house that requires a significant amount of upkeep. We want to help alleviate that burden for you while simultaneously helping the kids start their new family on solid ground." Susan chimed in, her voice dripping with that familiar condescending sweetness. "We know you are very attached to the property, Gloria," she said, placing her hand over her heart. "But as parents, it is our sworn duty to step aside and provide for the next generation. Richard and I have been discussing this extensively, and we want to offer you a very generous solution to this whole messy problem. We want to buy your house from you. That way, you get a nice sum of cash for your retirement, and the children get the space they desperately need. Everyone wins in this scenario." I stared at them, my face an unreadable mask. "You want to buy my house?" I repeated slowly, letting the words hang in the air between us. Richard nodded eagerly, reaching inside his suit jacket and pulling out a folded legal document. "Exactly," he said, sliding the paper across the table toward me. "We had our real estate attorney draft a formal purchase agreement this morning. We are prepared to offer you $250,000 in cash today. We will take care of all the closing costs and the transfer fees. You can take the money downsized to a comfortable little condo and put this whole ugly family disagreement behind you." I looked down at the paper without touching it. My house was a fully paid-off, custom-built brick estate in one of the most highly coveted neighborhoods in the entire metropolitan area. The current market value was well over $800,000, and the property values were only continuing to climb. They were sitting across from me in a private country club, pretending to act as noble saviors while actively trying to steal my home for less than 30% of its actual worth. The sheer audacity of their white savior complex was absolutely staggering. They truly believed I was ignorant enough to sign away $500,000 of equity. I slowly looked up from the contract, my eyes locking onto Richard's. "Let me make sure I understand this incredible offer," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet pitch. "You want to buy my $800,000 home for $250,000. You want to strip me of over $500,000 in hard-earned equity so your daughter can play house in a neighborhood she cannot afford. And you are packaging this massive financial theft as a favor to me. Is that your idea of a fair business transaction, Richard? Or do you simply assume I cannot read a basic property appraisal?" Richard's face flushed a deep, angry red. His fake smile vanished completely, replaced by a hard, defensive scowl. "Now listen here, Gloria," he snapped, dropping the friendly act entirely. "We are trying to help your son. Marcus is struggling to keep his head above water. He cannot afford a new mortgage, and he certainly cannot afford to renovate that overpriced condo he lives in. We are stepping up to provide a safety net for our daughter and our future grandchild, because you are clearly unwilling to do your duty as a mother. $250,000 is a very generous cash offer for an older woman looking to retire." I laughed, a cold, sharp sound that made Susan physically flinch in her seat. "Duty as a mother?" I repeated, shaking my head in sheer disbelief. "You are both sitting here preaching to me about generational wealth and parental sacrifice. If you are so incredibly concerned about where Chloe is going to raise this baby, why do you not give them your house? You live in a massive 6-bedroom mansion on 2 acres of land in the northern suburbs. Why do you not sell your house to them for 30% of its value and move into a tiny retirement condo? Oh, wait, that is right. You only believe in sacrifice when it is someone else making it." Susan gasped, pressing a hand to her pearl necklace. Her eyes widened in performative shock. "How dare you speak to us like that?" she whispered fiercely, leaning across the table. "We are merely trying to rescue your son from his own financial incompetence. We are the ones offering actual solutions, while you just sit there hoarding a massive property you do not even need. We are good, upstanding people offering you a way out of this mess. You should be thanking us on your knees for stepping in to fix the problems you created by raising such an irresponsible man." I pushed the insulting contract back across the table until it touched Richard's water glass. "I raised Marcus to be a man who works for what he wants," I corrected her sharply. "If he has become financially incompetent, it is because he married a woman who demands a luxury lifestyle she refuses to work for. Your daughter spends her days pretending to run a business while burning through every dollar my son makes. You are not trying to rescue him. You are trying to secure a free real estate asset for your daughter, using my life savings as a convenient stepping stone. The answer is absolutely not." Richard slammed his fist heavily onto the table. "Fine," he hissed softly. "If you refuse to help them, you will never see that grandchild. I will ensure Chloe cuts you out completely." I stood up unfazed. "Focus on your own affairs, Richard," I said calmly, walking away. Outside, my phone buzzed with an urgent email. Marcus had not paid his condo rent or homeowners association fees in exactly 4 months. The heavy oak front door of my home echoed with a loud knock. I was standing in my kitchen, wiping down the marble countertops, enjoying the quiet solitude of a Tuesday afternoon. The silence of my house had been a comfort since the disastrous Sunday dinner, but that peace was abruptly shattered. I walked to the foyer and looked through the peephole. Standing on my front porch, shifting impatiently, was my son Marcus. He was wearing a designer tracksuit that cost more than most people's monthly car payments, holding a cup of overpriced artisan coffee. I unlocked the door and pulled it open, keeping my expression completely neutral. I did not greet him. I simply stood waiting for him to explain his sudden, unannounced presence. Marcus did not offer an apology for trying to steal $50,000 from my bank account. Instead, he pushed past me, walking straight into my house as if he still owned the place. "We need to talk, Mom," he announced, walking directly into my kitchen and leaning against the island. I slowly closed the front door and followed him, crossing my arms. "I have absolutely nothing to say to you, Marcus," I replied, my voice perfectly calm but carrying a heavy warning. "Unless you are here to apologize and explain why you attempted to wire transfer my life savings, you can turn around and walk right back out that door." That bank thing was just a misunderstanding. He lied smoothly, not even looking ashamed. I was trying to access my own funds, and the system glitched. You always blow everything completely out of proportion and make me look like the bad guy. But that is not why I'm here today. I am here because we have a serious situation with the baby, and I need you to step up. I stayed exactly where I was, refusing to engage with his ridiculous lie. What kind of situation? I asked flatly. Marcus took a sip of his coffee, looking around my immaculate kitchen. Chloe has been incredibly stressed out since Sunday. He began slipping into his practiced victim narrative. She went to the doctor and her blood pressure is slightly elevated. Since you refused to give us this house, she has been trying to design a nursery in our condo, and the costs are adding up. She wants custom imported wallpaper, a smart crib, and an eco-friendly feeding station. We need a loan of $15,000 to get the nursery finished before the baby shower. I want the money transferred to my account by tomorrow morning. I stared at him, taking in the sheer magnitude of his entitlement. He was standing in the home he tried to manipulate me out of, demanding a $15,000 handout to fund his wife's absurd aesthetic obsession. You want me to hand you $15,000 for wallpaper when babies only need a safe place to sleep? I repeated slowly. Marcus slammed his coffee cup down on the marble counter, spilling brown liquid onto the pristine surface. It is not just about the wallpaper, Mom. He snapped, his voice rising in frustration. It is about providing the best possible start for your grandchild. $15,000 is pocket change to you, but it means the world to us. You owe us this much after the way you humiliated Chloe at dinner and completely ruined our special family announcement. I walked over to the island, grabbed a paper towel, and slowly wiped up the spilled coffee. I do not owe you anything, I stated firmly, tossing the towel into the trash can. But since you are standing here demanding a massive loan, let us talk about your finances. You claim you are building a legacy. You drive a luxury car. You wear expensive clothes, and your wife runs a high-end spa. If you are both so incredibly successful, why are you begging your mother for nursery money? Marcus puffed out his chest, projecting an air of wealthy confidence. Our money is tied up in investments right now, he lied without missing a single beat. My career is skyrocketing. Our business is absolutely booming. We just have a temporary cash flow issue because we are aggressively expanding our portfolio. We just need a little liquid cash to hold us over. I listened to his pathetic corporate buzzwords, feeling a deep wave of secondhand embarrassment. He was parroting phrases he had heard on social media, pretending to be a financial genius. A smart financial strategy, I echoed, nodding slowly. So your business is booming, your career is taking off, and your investments are solid. Everything is perfectly fine with your downtown condo and your daily expenses. Of course everything is fine, Marcus fired back, aggressively defensive. I am the man of my house. I provide everything my wife needs. I am just giving you the opportunity to be a good grandmother and show some actual financial support for our growing family. Right on cue, the distinct sound of a customized ringtone broke the tense silence. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He looked at the screen, and a smug, satisfied smile spread across his face. It is Aunt Loretta, he announced, tapping the screen and putting the call on speakerphone. Hello, Aunt Loretta, Marcus said, his voice dripping with fake affection. I am standing here with Mom right now, trying to talk some sense into her about the nursery fund. Aunt Loretta's voice crackled loudly through the small speaker filling the kitchen. Marcus, sweetheart, are you taking care of that pregnant wife of yours? She cooed, before her tone shifted into a sharp reprimand, directed entirely at me. Gloria, I swear to the Lord above, I do not understand what has gotten into you, she shouted. You are sitting on a mountain of money in that big empty house, and you cannot even spare a few dollars for your own flesh and blood. You are the most stingy, selfish woman I have ever met. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the edge of the counter, staring directly at the phone. Good afternoon to you too, Loretta, I said coldly. If you are so deeply concerned about Marcus and his luxury nursery, you are more than welcome to write him a check for $15,000 from your own bank account. Aunt Loretta gasped in exaggerated offense. That is completely different, and you know it, she squawked loudly. I am on a fixed retirement income. You were a wealthy corporate executive. It is your absolute duty to provide for the men in this family. You need to stop being so greedy, Gloria. Write the boy a check and stop making everything so difficult. Marcus stood tall, crossing his arms and looking at me with a victorious smirk. He truly believed he had me cornered. "See, Mom," Marcus said smoothly, picking up his coffee cup again. "Even Aunt Loretta knows you are being completely unreasonable. Just write the check. Transfer the money today, and we can pretend this whole ugly situation never happened. We can go back to being a happy family just like we used to be." I let the silence stretch out, allowing his arrogant words to hang heavily in the air. I did not yell. I did not justify my choices. I simply turned around and walked over to the solid oak desk sitting in the corner of my kitchen. This desk was where I managed my extensive real estate portfolio. I opened the top drawer and pulled out a crisp white envelope that had arrived in the mail 2 days prior. It had a bright red certified stamp across the top. I walked slowly back to the island, holding the document in my right hand. Marcus watched me, his smug smile faltering slightly as he tried to figure out what I was doing. Aunt Loretta was still rambling through the speakerphone, lecturing me about biblical duty and generational wealth. I reached out and tapped the red end call button on the screen, cutting her off mid-sentence. The kitchen plunged back into an absolute heavy silence. I opened the envelope, pulled out the thick piece of paper inside, and placed it face up on the marble countertop. I placed my index finger on the document and slid it slowly across the island, stopping exactly an inch away from his coffee cup. Marcus looked down at the paper. I watched the color completely drain from his face as his eyes scanned the bold black letters printed across the top of the page. His jaw clenched and his hands began to tremble very slightly. I leaned in close, locking my eyes onto his panicked expression, and delivered the final blow. "If your business is booming, Marcus," I asked, my voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper, "why did I just receive a pre-foreclosure notice for your unit?" The color vanished from my son's face so fast he looked like he might pass out. He stared at the pre-foreclosure notice resting on the island as if it were a snake preparing to strike. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound in the house was his ragged, uneven breathing. Aunt Loretta had already hung up the phone, leaving Marcus completely alone to face his massive financial failure. I watched his eyes dart wildly around the room, searching for an excuse, a lie, or a convenient scapegoat to blame for his disaster. "It is the economy, Mom," he stammered, his voice shaking as he backed away from the document. "The inflation rates are out of control right now. The property taxes went up and my company restructured my department, cutting my quarterly bonuses. It is just a temporary setback. I am going to pay it all back as soon as my next major deal closes. Everything is fine. I just need a little bit of time." I crossed my arms and looked at him with absolute pity. "A temporary setback does not result in 4 months of unpaid homeowners association fees and a legal pre-foreclosure notice, Marcus." I corrected him, my voice completely devoid of any warmth. "You are leasing cars you cannot afford to impress people you do not even like. And instead of acting like a man and telling your wife the truth about your financial situation, you came to my house to demand $15,000 for luxury wallpaper, while your own roof is quite literally being repossessed by the bank." "Please, Mom," Marcus begged, suddenly dropping the arrogant businessman facade. His voice cracked with genuine desperation. "You cannot tell Chloe about this. If she finds out we are losing the condo, she will leave me. You have to help me cover this up. Just give me the money to pay the past due balance and I will figure the rest out. I swear I will pay you back." I walked over to the front door and opened it wide, pointing outside. "Get out of my house, Marcus," I ordered firmly. "I am not funding your lies, and I am certainly not paying your past due mortgage. You are a grown man. Go home and tell your wife the truth." Marcus opened his mouth to argue, but the cold finality in my eyes stopped him dead in his tracks. He grabbed his designer coffee cup and practically ran out the door, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. Raising a child to become a responsible adult was the hardest job in the world, and realizing you had failed in that task was a bitter pill to swallow. I spent years trying to teach him the value of a dollar, but the toxic influence of a family that constantly enabled his worst habits had completely overshadowed my efforts. I had worked far too long and sacrificed far too much to surrender my absolute peace of mind to a spoiled, ungrateful man who only saw me as a walking bank account. About an hour later, a gentle knock echoed through the quiet house. I looked through the peephole and felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was my daughter, Jasmine. She was wearing her blue veterinary scrubs, her hair pulled back into a messy bun, looking exhausted but happy. I unlocked the door and pulled her into a warm embrace. She hugged me back tightly, smelling faintly of dog shampoo and clinical sanitizer. "I just wanted to check on you, Mom," Jasmine said, walking into the kitchen and setting her heavy canvas bag on the corner of the island. "After that horrible scene at the Sunday dinner, I was really worried about you. I know how cruel Marcus and Aunt Loretta can be when they do not get exactly what they want." I smiled at my beautiful, hard-working daughter and handed her a fresh glass of iced tea. "I am perfectly fine, Jasmine," I assured her, pulling out a stool for her to sit on. In fact, Marcus was just here a little while ago. He tried to demand a $15,000 loan for luxury wallpaper for the new nursery. Jasmine rolled her eyes, taking a long sip of her tea. "Of course he did," she sighed, shaking her head in disgust. "He lives in a fantasy world where money simply falls from the sky to fund his lifestyle. But, Mom, there is something you need to know about Marcus and his money, something I have been keeping to myself for a very long time because I did not want to cause any more drama in the family." I sat down on the stool across from her, giving her my full, undivided attention. "Tell me everything," I said softly, encouraging her to release whatever burden she was carrying. "You know how Aunt Loretta is always complaining about her bank?" Jasmine began, her voice hushed and serious. "You know how she constantly claims the bank is stealing her retirement funds with hidden fees and mysterious account deductions?" I nodded slowly, remembering all the times Aunt Loretta had loudly complained at family gatherings about her dwindling savings. I always assumed she was simply overspending on those expensive church hats and home shopping network jewelry. Jasmine shook her head, her expression turning incredibly sad. "It is not the bank, Mom," she revealed. "It is Marcus. Years ago, when he was still in college, Aunt Loretta gave him her online banking passwords so he could help her set up automatic bill payments. He never deleted those passwords. For the past 5 years, he has been secretly siphoning money out of her retirement account, a few $100s at a time, to pay for his designer clothes and expensive dinners. I caught him doing it on his laptop 2 years ago. He threatened to tell everyone I was a liar if I ever spoke a word about it to anyone. He knew Aunt Loretta would never believe me over him." I sat back in my chair, completely stunned by the sheer depth of his deception. My son was not just irresponsible. He was a calculated thief preying on an elderly woman who worshipped the ground he walked on. It made perfect sense now. When Aunt Loretta called me stingy, she was doing so while Marcus was actively robbing her blind. "I am so incredibly sorry you had to carry that dark secret all by yourself, Jasmine," I told her, reaching across the island to squeeze her hand tightly. "You should never have been put in that terrible position. You were trying to protect the peace in a family that never even bothered to protect you." Jasmine offered a small, sad smile, looking down at her tired hands. "It just hurts, Mom," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "It hurts to see him get everything handed to him on a silver platter while I had to fight tooth and nail for every single thing I have. I worked 3 exhausting jobs to pay my way through veterinary school. I ate cheap instant noodles for 4 solid years just to afford my required textbooks and laboratory fees. And every single time I asked the extended family for a little bit of support, or simply a word of encouragement, they told me I was being selfish and taking precious resources away from the golden boy. "You are the strongest person I know, Jasmine," I told her, my voice thick with emotion. "You built your success with your own 2 hands. No one can ever take that away from you. Marcus built his life on lies and theft, and his entire house of cards is finally collapsing." I told her about the pre-foreclosure notice and how Marcus was on the verge of losing everything. We sat in the quiet kitchen for another hour, talking and bonding in a way we had not done in years. It felt as though a massive, dark cloud had finally lifted from our complicated relationship, leaving only truth, healing, and deep mutual respect behind. Eventually, Jasmine stood up to leave, stretching her tired muscles after a long day at the animal clinic. She reached for her heavy canvas bag, resting at the far corner of the kitchen island. A thick manila folder slid out, falling onto the floor. "Oh, I think Marcus dropped something when he was standing here earlier," Jasmine said, bending down to pick up the folder. "It must have slipped out of his jacket pocket when you kicked him out. She opened the folder, assuming it was just another one of his past due bills. But as her eyes scanned the top page, she froze completely. Her breath caught in her throat, and her hands began to shake, holding the document out toward me. "Mom." Jasmine whispered, her voice trembling with absolute terror. "Why does Marcus have a forged appraisal document of your house?" I sat at the polished mahogany table in the private conference room of my attorney's office, staring blindly at the manila folder Jasmine had found. My lawyer, Jonathan, a sharp man with 30 years of experience in real estate and corporate law, examined the document through his silver spectacles. The silence in the room was heavy and suffocating, pressing down on my chest like a physical weight. I watched Jonathan's face as he carefully read through the pages. He finally looked up, placing the papers flat on the table, and folded his hands together. His expression was completely serious, conveying a deep professional concern. He told me this was not just a simple fake appraisal document used to impress friends or relatives. He explained that Marcus and Chloe had actively attempted to secure a massive commercial loan for Chloe's failing luxury spa. They had tried to use my fully paid-off 5-bedroom house as collateral to secure a business line of credit for $500,000. I felt my stomach drop to the floor as Jonathan handed me a second sheet of paper from his own files. It was a copy of a legal power of attorney document complete with a highly convincing forgery of my signature. My own son had actually committed a severe felony. He forged my name to steal my property and hand it over to a commercial bank just so his lazy, entitled wife could keep pretending she was a successful business owner. Jonathan explained that the bank had flagged the transaction during their final underwriting process because the deed of the house was held inside my private trust, and the forged power of attorney did not grant Marcus the authority to bypass the trust restrictions. They had failed, but the attempt alone was a criminal act of fraud. Jonathan asked me if I wanted to contact the district attorney immediately and press formal charges against my son. He told me Marcus could face significant prison time for attempting to defraud a financial institution and forging legal documents. I closed my eyes, taking a long, deep breath to steady my racing heart. A part of me, the mother who had held Marcus as a baby, wanted to protect him from the harsh reality of the criminal justice system. But the businesswoman who had worked tirelessly to build a legacy knew that protecting him would only enable him to destroy us both. I told Jonathan to hold off on calling the authorities just yet. I did not want to confront Marcus and Chloe immediately. If I confronted them now, they would simply lie, cry, and manipulate the rest of the family into believing I was overreacting. I needed to see exactly how far they were willing to go. I wanted to draw them out into the open where their greed could be fully exposed to everyone who had enabled them for all these years. I instructed Jonathan to begin quietly preparing all the necessary civil and criminal lawsuits, but to keep everything strictly confidential. I thanked him for his time, gathered the copied documents, and walked out into the bright afternoon sunlight, feeling a cold, calculating focus settle over my mind. When I got back to my house, I sat on the living room sofa and pulled out my phone. I dialed my son's number. He answered on the third ring, his voice tense and guarded, probably expecting me to yell at him about the pre-foreclosure notice. Instead, I softened my voice, injecting a tone of motherly concern and gentle submission. I told Marcus that I had been doing a lot of deep thinking since our last argument. I told him that perhaps I had been too harsh and too inflexible about the house. I said I understood that a growing family needed space and that I was reconsidering their proposal to transfer the deed to the property. The silence on the other end of the line was palpable. Then Marcus let out a long breath of pure relief, his arrogance instantly returning. He told me he knew I would eventually come to my senses and do the right thing for the family. He said Chloe would be absolutely thrilled. I invited them both to come over for a formal family meeting the following weekend to discuss the final logistics of the house transfer. Marcus eagerly agreed, completely unaware that he was walking directly into a carefully laid trap. I spent the next 2 days going about my normal routine, projecting the image of a defeated older woman who had finally surrendered to the demands of the younger generation. But the illusion of family peace was completely shattered by my daughter-in-law. Jasmine came over to my house on Thursday evening, holding her phone out toward me with an expression of absolute disgust. She told me I needed to see what Chloe had just posted on social media. I took the phone and looked at the screen. It was a video posted to Chloe's public profile. The video showed Chloe standing in the driveway of her luxury condo, wearing designer sunglasses and holding the keys to a brand new white luxury sport utility vehicle. She was smiling smugly at the camera leaning against the expensive car. The text overlay on the video read, "When your mother-in-law finally does the right thing and secures your soft life." The caption below the video was filled with hashtags about generational wealth, luxury lifestyle, and being blessed. She had gone out and leased a massively expensive new vehicle under the assumption that they were about to take ownership of my $800,000 home. They were doubling down on their financial disaster, completely blinded by their own greed and entitlement. The very next week, the mail carrier delivered a thick, heavy envelope to my front door. It was addressed in elegant gold calligraphy. I opened it carefully, pulling out a piece of thick, textured cardstock that smelled faintly of expensive perfume. It was an invitation to a baby shower for Chloe and Marcus. But this was not a simple backyard barbecue or a modest gathering at a local community center. The invitation detailed a lavish, extravagant event to be held at the grand ballroom of the most exclusive luxury hotel in the downtown district. The kind of venue that charged tens of thousands of dollars just to walk through the doors. I read through the flowery script detailing the catered menu, the live string quartet, and the mandatory formal dress code. But what made my blood run absolutely cold was the bold print at the very bottom of the invitation. It proudly declared that the event was graciously hosted and financially sponsored by Gloria, the loving grandmother-to-be. Chloe had publicly listed me as the sole financial sponsor of a $20,000 event without ever asking for my permission or even giving me a warning. She had sent these extravagant invitations out to her wealthy parents, her country club friends, and every single member of our extended family. Her strategy was painfully obvious. She knew that if she booked the venue and put my name on the invitations, I would be too deeply embarrassed to refuse payment when the final bill arrived. She was counting on my pride and my desire to maintain a perfect family image in front of high society. She thought I would silently absorb the massive financial blow just to avoid a public scandal. It was a brilliant manipulation tactic used by a woman who had never worked a hard day in her entire life. Sunday morning arrived, and I went to my local church wearing a beautiful modest dress and my favorite pearls. As soon as the service ended and we moved into the fellowship hall, I was immediately surrounded by Aunt Loretta and her entire circle of church friends. Aunt Loretta was practically glowing with smug satisfaction. She grabbed my arm and pulled me into the center of the group, her voice carrying loudly over the chatter of the congregation. She told all the women how incredibly proud she was of me for finally stepping up and doing my duty as a mother. She praised me for paying for the lavish baby shower and for giving my beautiful home to my son. The other women nodded in agreement, patting my shoulder and telling me what a wonderful grandmother I was going to be. They talked about how expensive the downtown luxury hotel was and how generous I was to spare absolutely no expense for Marcus and Chloe. I stood in the center of their circle, maintaining a perfect, icy smile. I did not correct them. I did not raise my voice or defend my finances. I simply thanked them for their kind words and nodded along as they praised my imaginary generosity. Aunt Loretta looked at me with a triumphant gleam in her eye, truly believing she had bullied me into submission. She thought her harsh words and family pressure had finally broken my spirit. Let them talk, I thought to myself as I gracefully excused myself from the group and walked toward the church parking lot. Let them spread the news to every corner of the city. Let Chloe and Marcus bask in the false glory of their stolen wealth. The higher they built their pedestal of lies, the more devastating the absolute destruction would be when I finally pulled the foundation out from under them. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, parked in the quiet shade of an old oak tree behind the church. The air conditioning hummed softly as I pulled my phone from my leather purse. I opened my contacts and found the direct office number for the event manager at the luxury hotel where the baby shower was scheduled to take place. I had done plenty of corporate business with this specific hotel in the past, hosting massive executive retreats and financial summits. The manager recognized my name immediately as soon as I introduced myself. He sounded thrilled to hear from me, thanking me profusely for choosing their venue for my family celebration. He told me the catering menu was finalized, the floral arrangements were ordered, and the grand ballroom was entirely reserved for the weekend of the baby shower. He casually mentioned that the total cost of the event was currently sitting at just over $22,000 and asked if I wanted to put a credit card on file for the final incidental charges. I kept my voice incredibly smooth and perfectly professional, projecting the calm authority of a woman who was in total control of her empire. I told the manager that there had been a slight misunderstanding regarding the financial arrangements for the upcoming event. I explained that while my name was listed on the invitations as the host, I would not be funding the baby shower in any capacity. I instructed him very clearly to completely remove my name from the billing account and to void any preliminary authorizations that may have been run under my profile. The manager sounded briefly confused, asking how they should proceed with securing the remaining balance for the ballroom reservation and the expensive catering orders. I smiled a cold, hard smile, looking at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I told him he would need to contact the actual hosts of the party, Marcus and Chloe, directly. I suggested he demand a valid credit card from them immediately to secure the reservation, ensuring that every single dime of that $22,000 bill was placed entirely on their shoulders. He agreed to make the changes right away, thanking me for my time. I ended the call, placed my phone back into my purse, and drove home in absolute silence, ready to watch their entire fake world burn to the ground. The day of the baby shower arrived with a heavy, humid heat that settled over downtown Atlanta. I drove my car to the grand entrance of the luxury hotel, handing my keys to the valet. I walked through the massive glass doors and followed the signs directing guests to the grand ballroom. The moment I stepped inside the venue, I was immediately struck by the sheer, staggering opulence of the event. Chloe had completely outdone herself in the worst possible way. The massive ballroom was draped in floor-to-ceiling white silk fabric. Huge crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings. They cast a warm golden glow over the room. There were dozens of round tables covered in imported lace tablecloths and topped with towering centerpieces made of rare white orchids and imported roses. In the center of the room sat a massive custom ice sculpture carved into the shape of a baby carriage. A string quartet played classical music softly in the corner, while waiters in crisp black tuxedos walked around carrying silver trays filled with expensive appetizers and sparkling apple cider in flutes. It was not a celebration of a new life, but a highly calculated theatrical production designed to project an image of massive wealth and high social status that neither Marcus nor Chloe actually possessed. I walked over to a high-top table near the back of the room and accepted a glass of iced water from a passing waiter. I watched the crowd mingle. Half of the room was filled with Chloe's wealthy white friends from the country club and her parents, Richard and Susan. The other half consisted of my extended family, including Aunt Loretta, who was wearing an enormous yellow church hat that completely blocked the view of anyone standing directly behind her today. Chloe was holding court near the massive gift table, wearing a custom designer maternity gown that draped heavily over her small frame. She was surrounded by 3 of her friends from the country club, speaking loudly enough for anyone within a 10-foot radius to hear every single word. She was bragging aggressively about her new real estate acquisition. I stood quietly in the shadows listening as she described my beautiful 5-bedroom brick home as if it were a massive burden she was generously taking off my hands. She told her friends that the house was incredibly dated, unfortunately, and needed hundreds of thousands of dollars in modern renovations. She laughed openly as she described her plans to completely rip out the custom mahogany kitchen cabinets I had picked out with my late husband. She bragged about hiring a luxury landscape architect to bulldoze my prized rose garden to install a modern infinity pool and an outdoor yoga pavilion. Her friends gasped in admiration, telling her how incredibly lucky she was to secure such a massive property in this terrible housing market. Chloe simply smiled and placed a hand on her stomach, playing the role of the blessed matriarch. She told them that generational wealth was all about making the right moves and ensuring the baby had a proper estate to inherit. She never once mentioned that she and Marcus were facing active pre-foreclosure on their downtown condo. She never mentioned the forged legal documents or the massive financial lies holding her fragile world together. She was completely lost in her own delusion. Aunt Loretta spotted me standing alone and immediately marched over, dragging 2 women from our church congregation along with her. She grabbed my arm and squeezed it tightly, her face beaming with fake and exaggerated affection. "Gloria," she practically shouted over the classical music, "look at this beautiful, extravagant party today. You really outdid yourself this time. Everyone in the family is just so incredibly proud of you for stepping up and paying for all of this. It takes a big woman to admit when she is wrong and do the right thing for her son." The 2 church women nodded in vigorous agreement, praising my generosity and my commitment to family values. I simply smiled a tight, polite smile and took another slow sip of my iced water. I did not correct them at all. I did not tell them that I had already canceled the financial authorization days ago. I let them believe the lie because the truth was going to be revealed very shortly, and I wanted the impact to be absolutely devastating. I excused myself from their suffocating presence and walked slowly around the perimeter of the room, observing the guests. Richard and Susan were standing near the ice sculpture, looking incredibly smug. Richard gave me a stiff nod of acknowledgement, clearly believing his harsh words at the country club had intimidated me into submission. Susan waved her hand, adorned with diamonds, smiling as if we were the best of friends. I simply nodded back, keeping my expression completely unreadable. After about an hour of mingling and eating expensive appetizers, the string quartet suddenly stopped playing. The room grew quiet as Marcus walked confidently up to a small elevated stage at the front of the ballroom. He was wearing a custom-tailored beige suit that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. He tapped the microphone twice, sending a soft thumping sound echoing through the massive room. Everyone turned their attention to the stage. Marcus smiled widely, looking over the crowd. He looked out over the sea of faces with an expression of deep, manufactured humility. He cleared his throat and began his highly rehearsed speech. "Thank you all so much for coming out today to celebrate this incredible milestone with us," Marcus began, his voice smooth and commanding. "Chloe and I are just so incredibly blessed to be surrounded by such amazing friends and family. As we prepare to welcome this new life into the world, we have been doing a lot of deep reflecting on what it means to build a true legacy." He paused for dramatic effect, purposely placing a hand over his heart. He looked directly across the room, locking his eyes onto mine. "Building a legacy is not just about money," he continued, his voice dropping to a softer, more emotional register. "It is about sacrifice. It is about the older generation stepping aside to pave the way for the new generation. It is about family putting aside their own selfish desires to ensure that the children have a strong, stable foundation to grow upon." Chloe walked up the short steps to the stage and stood next to him, wiping a fake tear from her eye. Marcus wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Today is not just a baby shower," Marcus declared loudly, his voice rising with theatrical passion. "Today is the official beginning of our new chapter, and we could not have started this chapter without the incredible generosity of my mother, Gloria." The entire room erupted into loud, enthusiastic applause. Aunt Loretta cheered loudly from the second row. Susan clapped her hands together, beaming with pride. Marcus held up a hand, signaling for the crowd to quiet down. He reached behind the podium and pulled out a massive velvet gift box. It was wrapped in a thick gold ribbon. He held the box up high for everyone to see. "My mother has decided to give us the ultimate gift," Marcus announced, his voice trembling with fake emotion. "She has decided to transfer the deed of her beautiful 5-bedroom estate to us so we can raise our child in a true family home. These are the official keys to our new generational estate." He dramatically pulled the gold ribbon and opened the velvet box, revealing a shiny new set of keys resting on a white silk cushion. The crowd gasped loudly. They clapped even louder. Chloe buried her face in his shoulder, acting completely overwhelmed by the imaginary gesture. It was the most sickening display of public manipulation I had ever witnessed. He was using the crowd to completely box me in, hoping that the sheer public pressure of the moment would force me to actually hand over the house. He thought I would be too embarrassed to interrupt his beautiful speech and correct the narrative in front of all these important wealthy people. I stood perfectly still at the back of the room, waiting for the inevitable storm to arrive. The applause slowly began to die down as people reached for their champagne flutes. But before Marcus could raise his glass, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. A tall man, wearing a sharp black suit, walked briskly into the room. It was the hotel event manager. He walked directly down the center aisle and climbed the stage. "Excuse me," the manager said loudly, taking the microphone. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Marcus and Chloe must provide a credit card immediately because the original card on file by Gloria has been declined." The heavy silence that fell over the grand ballroom was deafening. The hotel event manager stood on the elevated stage holding the microphone with a look of polite but professional expectation. He repeated his request for a valid credit card from Marcus and Chloe, explaining that the $22,000 balance needed to be settled immediately before the catering staff could bring out the main course. Chloe stood frozen next to the massive velvet gift box, holding the fake keys to my house. The color rapidly drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and very small inside her expensive designer maternity gown. She looked out at the sea of faces staring back at her. Her wealthy friends from the country club began whispering behind their hands. The illusion of her soft life was shattering right in front of her eyes. Marcus grabbed the microphone from the manager, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and sudden anger. He forced a tight laugh, trying to brush the situation off as a simple clerical error. He told the crowd to enjoy their drinks and promised that the minor financial mix-up would be sorted out in a moment. But the damage was already done. The string quartet remained silent. The waiters stopped passing out the expensive appetizers. The entire room watched as Marcus handed the microphone back to the manager and practically leaped off the stage. He stormed straight down the center aisle of the ballroom, heading directly for the back corner where I was standing calmly with my glass of iced water. His heavy footsteps echoed on the polished hardwood floor. Aunt Loretta looked completely bewildered, her massive yellow church hat bobbing as she turned in her seat to watch him approach me. Susan and Richard were standing near the ice sculpture, looking horrified and deeply offended by the sudden disruption of their perfect high society event. Marcus reached my table and slammed both of his hands down on the high-top surface, leaning in close so the other guests could not hear his frantic whispers. "What are you doing, Mom?" he demanded, his voice shaking with absolute rage. "Why did the manager just say your card was declined? You need to call your bank right now and fix this before Chloe has a complete panic attack." I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, detached sense of finality. "I did not decline the card, Marcus," I replied, my voice perfectly steady and completely devoid of any sympathy. "I called the hotel days ago and permanently removed my name from the billing account. I never authorized this massive expense, and I am certainly not paying for a party that was designed to publicly manipulate me into giving up my home. You booked this lavish venue. You ordered the imported roses and the custom ice sculpture. Now you can pay for it." Marcus stared at me, his eyes wide with genuine panic. He looked back at Chloe, who was now openly crying on the stage, surrounded by her confused friends. "You cannot do this to us," he hissed desperately. "We do not have $22,000 to give them today. If you do not pay this bill right now, they are going to kick us out and call the police. You are going to ruin our reputation forever. You are supposed to be my mother. You are supposed to protect me." I placed my glass of water down on the table, my movements slow and incredibly deliberate. "Protect you?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Like the way you protected me when you tried to steal $50,000 from my bank account while eating dinner at my table. Or perhaps the way you protected me when you forged my signature on a legal power of attorney document to secretly use my paid-off house as collateral for a commercial business loan." Marcus physically recoiled, stepping back from the table as if he had just been struck by lightning. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He realized in that exact moment that I knew absolutely everything. The pre-foreclosure on his condo, the stolen retirement money from Aunt Loretta, and the massive felony he committed with the forged documents. He had absolutely nowhere left to hide. I did not stay at the back of the room. I smoothed down the skirt of my emerald green dress and walked past Marcus, stepping smoothly into the center aisle. The whispers of the crowd grew louder as I made my way toward the front of the ballroom. Aunt Loretta called out my name, asking what was going on, but I completely ignored her. I walked up the short stairs to the stage, standing right next to the crying Chloe and the incredibly uncomfortable hotel manager. I reached out, and the manager politely handed me the microphone. I turned to face the massive crowd of guests. My posture was perfectly straight, and my expression was completely unbothered. I looked at the country club friends, the church ladies, and the extended family members who had spent the last week praising my supposed generosity. I took a deep breath and let my voice echo clearly through the silent room. "Let me clear up a massive misunderstanding," I announced calmly. "I never agreed to pay for this circus, just like I never agreed to give you my home." The entire room erupted in loud gasps. Aunt Loretta dropped her purse on the floor. I pointed directly at the velvet box containing the fake keys. "My son and his wife have spent the last few weeks spinning a massive web of lies to convince all of you that they are wealthy, independent adults." I continued, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "They wanted you to believe that I was voluntarily stepping aside to hand them my $800,000 estate. The truth is, they are completely broke. They are currently facing pre-foreclosure on their luxury downtown condo because they have not paid their mortgage or their association fees in 4 months. They tried to steal my life savings. They forged legal documents to try and take out loans against my property. And they booked this incredibly expensive hotel under my name without my permission, hoping that my fear of public embarrassment would force me to foot the massive bill. Well, I am not embarrassed. They are the ones who should be deeply ashamed. I am officially cutting off all financial support. I am not signing over my deed, and I am definitely not paying for a single appetizer in this room today." I handed the microphone back to the hotel manager, who was staring at me with wide eyes. The chaos that immediately followed my announcement was absolutely spectacular to witness. Chloe's wealthy friends from the exclusive country club began grabbing their designer purses and quickly backing away from the stage, wanting absolutely nothing to do with the scandal. They whispered frantically to each other, shooting looks of pure disgust at the crying mother-to-be. Aunt Loretta sat completely frozen in her chair, her mouth hanging wide open in utter disbelief as the reality of her golden nephew's massive deception finally crashed down around her. Jasmine stood near the back of the room, watching the entire scene unfold with a look of profound, quiet victory. She knew exactly how long I had suffered under the weight of this toxic family dynamic, and she was finally watching me break the chains. But not everyone was ready to accept the harsh reality of the situation. Richard, Chloe's father, pushed his way violently through the crowd of confused guests. His face was a mask of bright red fury, his silver hair suddenly looking disheveled. He marched directly up to the edge of the elevated stage, pointing a thick, trembling finger right at my face. He completely abandoned his practiced high society manners, revealing the ugly, entitled arrogance hiding underneath his expensive linen suit. "How dare you do this to my pregnant daughter?" he screamed, his voice echoing harshly against the crystal chandeliers. "You are nothing but a bitter, vindictive old woman trying to destroy a beautiful, growing family because you are too selfish to share your wealth. You led them to believe they had financial security, and then you publicly humiliated them to stroke your own massive ego. You think you are so smart and so powerful standing up there, but you are nothing but a common ghetto scammer. You are going to pay for this, Gloria. I will make sure my lawyers completely destroy you. I will sue you for every single penny you have for intentionally inflicting this emotional distress on my child." I looked down at him, feeling a genuine smile spread across my face. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage. "Careful, Richard," I said softly. "You do not want to upset your landlord." Richard stood at the edge of the stage, his face a deep shade of crimson. He had just threatened to sue me for emotional distress, calling me a common scammer in front of the entire ballroom. The country club guests were murmuring amongst themselves, eager to see how I would respond to his aggressive outburst. I looked down at him from the elevated platform, feeling a profound sense of calm wash over me. I had spent my entire career sitting across from angry, arrogant men exactly like Richard. Men who believed that volume and intimidation could substitute for actual leverage. I smoothed the fabric of my emerald green dress and adjusted the microphone in my hand. "Careful, Richard," I repeated, my voice carrying perfectly through the silent room. "You really do not want to upset your landlord." Richard froze completely. The angry red flush on his face drained away instantly, replaced by a look of sheer confusion. He blinked several times, trying to process the word I had just used. "Landlord!" He scoffed, his voice losing its confident, booming edge. "I own a highly successful consulting firm, Gloria. My offices are located in the premier commercial district downtown. I do not have a landlord standing on a stage at a baby shower. I rent from a massive corporate entity called Apex Commercial Properties. You are completely delusional." I smiled a warm, genuine smile that made him take a hesitant step backward. He was absolutely right about the name of the company. Apex Commercial Properties was a highly exclusive real estate holding firm that owned several of the most coveted commercial buildings in the entire metropolitan area. What Richard and the rest of my family did not know was the identity of the person who completely owned and operated that corporate entity. When I retired from my position as a chief financial officer, I did not simply sit at home and bake pies. I took my massive corporate bonuses, my retirement packages, and my deep knowledge of the commercial real estate market, and I began quietly investing. I created Apex Commercial Properties as a blind trust and a limited liability company to protect my privacy and shield my assets from the greed of my extended family. I knew that if Aunt Loretta or Marcus ever found out how much wealth I had actually accumulated, they would never stop demanding handouts. So I operated completely in the shadows. I purchased high-end office buildings, luxury retail spaces, and premium commercial properties across the city. I hired a third-party management firm to handle the daily operations, the tenant complaints, and the rent collection. On paper, my name was completely invisible, but in reality, I held the absolute ultimate authority over every single square foot of those buildings. I reached into my handbag and pulled out 2 thick manila folders. I held them up for the entire ballroom to see. "Let us talk about Apex Commercial Properties. Richard," I said, my voice smooth and relentless. 3 years ago, a young woman approached my management team looking to lease a premium retail space for a luxury spa. She had no business experience, and her credit history was incredibly weak. But she had a wealthy father who was willing to sign as a personal guarantor on the commercial lease. I looked directly at Chloe, who was leaning heavily against the ice sculpture, looking like she was about to faint. "Your luxury spa." "Chloe," I announced loudly, "the one you brag about constantly on social media. The business you claim is funding your beautiful, soft, aesthetic lifestyle. That spa is located on the ground floor of the premier building owned entirely by Apex Commercial Properties, which means you rent that space directly from me." The guests gasped collectively. Chloe's friends from the country club stared at her with wide eyes, shocked by the revelation. Chloe shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "No!" she whispered, her voice trembling. "That is impossible. You cannot be the owner. You are just a retired woman living in an old house." I opened the first manila folder and pulled out a stack of documents, holding them up to the bright chandelier light. "I hold the original lease agreement right here," I stated firmly. "And I also hold the official accounting ledger for your business account. You have not paid your commercial rent in 6 months, Chloe. My management team has sent you dozens of warnings and late payment notices. You have completely ignored all of them, preferring to spend your incoming revenue on designer clothes and leased luxury cars instead of paying your legitimate business debts. You have breached your contract entirely. As of yesterday morning, my lawyers officially filed the paperwork to terminate your lease. You are being evicted from the commercial space. Your business is officially over." Chloe let out a loud, dramatic sob, collapsing into a nearby chair. Marcus rushed over to her, but he looked completely paralyzed, unable to offer any comfort or solutions. He stared at me with a look of absolute terror, finally realizing the massive scale of the empire I had built right under his nose. I turned my attention back to Richard, who was standing frozen at the base of the stage. His mouth was hanging slightly open, his arrogant demeanor completely shattered. But I was not finished yet. I opened the second manila folder and pulled out another thick stack of legally binding documents. I looked down at him, my eyes completely devoid of any sympathy or hesitation. "Now let us talk about your highly successful consulting firm, Richard," I said, projecting my voice so every single person in the room could hear the absolute truth. "You brag about your wealth and your high society status. You judge my family and call us names believing you are inherently superior because of your zip code and your country club membership. You rent the entire top-floor penthouse suite in the exact same commercial building as your daughter's failing spa." I continued, my voice ringing with undeniable authority. "You signed a 10-year commercial lease with Apex Commercial Properties, boasting about your massive profit margins and your elite client list. But the reality is completely different from the illusion you project. Your consulting firm has been bleeding money for the past 2 years. You lost your 3 biggest corporate accounts last spring, and you have been desperately scrambling to keep up appearances ever since." I held up his accounting ledger, waving it gently in the air. "You are currently 4 months behind on your commercial rent, Richard. You owe my holding company over $120,000 in past due payments and late fees. You have been dodging phone calls from my property managers and making empty promises about incoming wire transfers that never actually arrive. You are not a wealthy, successful businessman, Richard. You are a fraud, drowning in massive corporate debt." The silence in the grand ballroom was so profound you could hear the ice sculpture slowly dripping onto the table. Susan, Richard's wife, let out a loud gasp, pressing both of her hands over her mouth. Her face turned completely pale as she looked at her husband, waiting for him to deny the accusations. But Richard could not say a single word. He stood there trembling, his fists clenched at his sides, staring up at me in absolute horror. He knew every single word I said was completely true. The country club friends, the people they had spent years trying to impress, began slowly backing away from them as if their financial ruin was a contagious disease. Aunt Loretta sat in her chair looking back and forth between me and Richard, stunned into silence. The false pedestal she had placed this wealthy white family upon had just crumbled into dust right before her very eyes. She finally saw them for exactly who they were, broke, desperate people trying to maintain an illusion. I walked to the edge of the stage and tossed the folders at Richard's feet. The documents hit the floor, scattering the eviction notices across the ground. "You have until the end of the month to vacate both of those commercial properties," I announced, my voice cold and absolute. "If you do not leave, my lawyers will file a lawsuit to seize your assets. You tried to force me out of my own home to fund your fake lifestyle. But you picked a fight with the wrong woman. The destruction of their public image was absolute." Chloe suddenly jumped up from her chair, her face red with desperation. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her voice shrill and hysterical. "You cannot do this to us!" she screamed, echoing through the ballroom. "You cannot take everything away. We own the condo we live in, at least." I stood on the stage looking down at her. I just smiled and laughed. Chloe stood on the stage screaming at the top of her lungs about the luxury condo downtown. She pointed her shaking finger at me and demanded that I leave the ballroom immediately. She told everyone that even if her luxury spa was completely ruined, they still owned their beautiful home. She cried and said I could never take their house away from them because they bought it with their own money. I looked at her terrible, tear-stained face and felt absolutely nothing. I simply stood there holding my microphone and let out a very long, cold, genuine loud laugh. My laughter echoed through the massive ballroom, silencing her completely. The entire crowd watched me in total shock, waiting to see what I would say next. I took a slow step forward and looked directly at my son. Marcus was pale and sweating heavily. He knew exactly what was coming. I turned my attention back to his hysterical wife. "You really believe you own that luxury condo downtown?" I asked, my voice echoing loudly across the room. "You really believe your husband went to a commercial bank and secured a mortgage for a $500,000 property by himself?" Chloe nodded frantically, her expensive maternity dress shaking as she breathed heavily. "We signed the closing papers 5 years ago," she insisted, her voice cracking with pure desperation. "We have the keys, and we pay the mortgage every single month." I slowly shook my head, completely destroying her final fragile delusion. "You do not pay a mortgage, Chloe," I corrected her firmly. "You pay rent. Or at least you used to pay rent before your husband decided to stop sending the checks 4 months ago. Your husband does not own that condo, and he never actually did buy it anyway. I explained the absolute truth to the silent crowd. 5 years ago, Marcus wanted to buy that condo to impress his friends and portray an image of massive wealth. But his credit score was completely ruined from years of reckless spending and unpaid credit card bills. No bank in the entire state was willing to give him a loan for a bicycle, let alone a luxury penthouse. He came to my house begging and crying for a massive financial bailout. He pleaded with me to co-sign a loan, but I refused to attach my name to his terrible outstanding debt. Instead, I offered him a strict business deal. I told the crowd how my private holding company, Apex Commercial Properties, stepped in. My company bought that luxury downtown condo in pure cash. I am the sole legal owner of the property you live in. I allowed Marcus to move in under a strict rent-to-own contract. He was supposed to pay my company every single month and eventually build enough equity to buy the property back from me. It was a generous opportunity for him to prove he could act like a responsible and mature adult man for once. But Marcus was never a responsible man. He treated the rent-to-own agreement like an optional suggestion. He consistently missed payments and begged for extensions while continuing to buy designer clothes and lease expensive luxury cars. And for the past 4 months, he has not paid my company a single dime. He ignored all the late notices and the final warnings from my property management team. He thought he could outsmart the system because I was his mother. He thought I would simply absorb his massive financial failures just like the rest of the family always did for him. Chloe stared at Marcus with a look of pure, unadulterated horror. She grabbed his arm, shaking him violently in front of all their wealthy friends. "Tell me she is lying, Marcus," she screamed hysterically. "Tell me we actually own our home. Tell me you did not lie to me for our entire marriage." Marcus could not even look her in the eye. He stared down at his expensive leather shoes, his silence confirming every single word I had just spoken. Chloe's knees buckled, and she slumped against the massive custom ice sculpture, weeping loudly into her trembling, empty hands everywhere. I was not completely finished yet. The business of real estate does not pause for family drama or fake tears. As I stood on the stage, I made a subtle hand gesture toward the back of the grand ballroom. A man dressed exactly like the hotel catering staff stepped forward. He had been quietly standing near the champagne fountain for the entire party, blending in perfectly with the other waiters. But he was not there to serve expensive appetizers or refill empty water glasses. He was an official process server hired specifically by my highly effective corporate legal team today. The crowd parted nervously as the disguised waiter walked quickly down the center aisle. He bypassed the terrified guests and the stunned family members, heading straight for the stage. He walked up the short stairs and stood directly in front of my trembling son. The process server reached inside his crisp black tuxedo jacket and pulled out a thick, heavy envelope. Marcus tried to back away, but there was nowhere left to run. The server pressed the envelope firmly against my son's chest, forcing him to take it. "You have been officially served," the serious man announced, very clearly aloud. The server turned around and calmly walked out of the ballroom, leaving a trail of absolute destruction in his wake. Marcus looked down at the heavy envelope as if it were a literal bomb. He slowly opened the flap and pulled out the legal documents. His eyes scanned the bold printed words and his shoulders completely collapsed. It was an official court-ordered eviction notice. My holding company had legally terminated his rent-to-own contract forever. He and Chloe had exactly 14 days to pack up all their expensive belongings and vacate my luxury downtown condo property for good. The absolute reality of their financial ruin settled over the room like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Richard's jaw was clenched tight as he realized his daughter was now completely homeless and broke. Susan's fake smile was permanently erased, but the silence was suddenly shattered by a loud, piercing shriek from the front row. Aunt Loretta jumped out of her seat, her massive yellow church hat trembling with pure, furious rage. She pointed her wrinkled finger directly at my face. "You are an absolute monster, Gloria," she screamed at the top of her lungs, completely losing her entire mind right there. Aunt Loretta stormed toward the stage, defending her precious golden nephew with blind, irrational loyalty. "How could you do this to your own flesh and blood?" she yelled, her face turning a deep angry purple. "He is your only son. He is the man of our family. You have all this money hidden away, and instead of helping him, you destroy his life in front of the entire city. You evict a pregnant woman from her home. You are a wicked, selfish woman, and God will punish you for turning your back on the people who truly love you deeply." I looked down at Aunt Loretta, feeling a deep wave of pure disgust. She had spent her entire life enabling this useless man, and now she was blaming me for his total failure. I opened my mouth to put her in her place, but a strong, confident voice echoed from the back of the room, interrupting me completely. "Shut up, Aunt Loretta," the voice commanded sharply. The entire crowd turned around to see Jasmine walking slowly down the center aisle. My daughter looked incredibly powerful, her head held high as she marched toward the front of the huge ballroom space. Jasmine reached the stage and stood protectively by my side, glaring down at the woman who had tormented her for decades. "Do not you dare call my mother a monster," Jasmine told Aunt Loretta, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "My mother tried to teach Marcus how to be a responsible adult while you treated him like a helpless infant. You gave him everything he ever wanted and ignored his massive flaws. You told everyone he was a successful businessman. You defended his horrible behavior because you thought he was the absolute pride and joy of this whole family always." Aunt Loretta sputtered, her eyes wide with shock. "He is a good boy," she insisted stubbornly, clutching her purse to her chest. "He just made a few small mistakes. He does not deserve to be treated like a criminal." Jasmine let out a harsh, bitter laugh that silenced the older woman completely. "A few small mistakes," Jasmine repeated, slowly shaking her head in total disbelief. "Why do you not tell Aunt Loretta the truth, Marcus? Why do you not tell her what happened to her bank accounts?" Marcus closed his eyes, looking completely sick to his stomach right then there. Marcus stood frozen on the elevated stage as Jasmine demanded he tell the truth about the stolen retirement accounts. The entire ballroom held its breath, waiting for his response. Aunt Loretta stepped closer to the stage, her hands trembling wildly as she looked up at the beloved nephew she had worshipped since the day he was born. She asked him what Jasmine was talking about, her voice cracking with a fragile, desperate hope that it was all a terrible misunderstanding. Marcus looked down at his expensive leather shoes, completely unable to meet her demanding, intense gaze. He finally whispered that he was incredibly sorry and that he only borrowed the money because he was desperate to keep his business afloat. The fragile hope in Aunt Loretta's eyes shattered instantly, replaced by a blinding, furious realization. She realized that for 5 long years, the bank had not been stealing her fixed income. The actual thief was the golden boy she had bought expensive gifts for and defended aggressively against his own mother. She let out a guttural cry of absolute betrayal. She screamed that he was a cruel monster, a wicked, deceitful boy who stole from a vulnerable old woman who loved him unconditionally. She reached up and slapped her palms against the wooden stage, yelling that she had defended his honor against everyone, and this horrible humiliation was how he repaid her unwavering loyalty. The golden child pedestal was completely and permanently destroyed right before our eyes. The church ladies who had praised him earlier now looked at him with sheer disgust, shaking their heads at the absolute disgrace he had brought upon his family. The chaos only multiplied as Richard and Susan fully comprehended the scale of the financial disaster. Richard pushed his way past the crying Aunt Loretta, his face twisted in pure, unfiltered rage. He pointed his finger directly at Marcus, yelling that he was a worthless con artist and a criminal who had maliciously tricked his innocent daughter into marriage. Richard screamed that Marcus had completely ruined his little girl's life and dragged their prestigious country club family name into the mud. Susan stood behind her husband, crying loudly and shouting that Marcus was a manipulative predator who preyed on their generosity. They completely ignored the fact that their own daughter had willingly participated in the forged documents and the fake lease agreements. They desperately needed a scapegoat to protect their own shattered egos, and Marcus was the perfect, easy target. Richard threatened to call the local police right that very second and have Marcus arrested for elder abuse and corporate fraud. He yelled that he would gladly spend every last dime he had left to make sure Marcus rotted in a cold prison cell for what he did to Chloe and their spotless social reputation. Marcus took a hesitant step back, holding his trembling hands up in a weak attempt to defend himself against the onslaught. He pleaded with Richard, saying they were all family and they needed to stick together to figure a way out of this massive financial mess. But Richard laughed a cold, ruthless, incredibly bitter laugh. He told Marcus that he was never their true family and that he was absolutely nothing but a cheap street hustler playing dress-up in a tailored luxury suit while desperately trying to pretend he was a real wealthy man. Chloe had been weeping softly into her hands, but her father's screaming words finally snapped her back to reality. She stood up, her custom maternity gown wrinkled and stained with dark streaks of mascara and salty tears. She looked around the lavish ballroom at her wealthy friends who were actively fleeing toward the exit doors, wanting no part of the impending police investigation and public scandal. She looked at her furious parents, and then she looked at the man she had promised to love forever. She saw Marcus not as the successful corporate entrepreneur he pretended to be, but as a broke, desperate criminal who had just lost their luxury downtown condo and her beloved spa business in a single disastrous afternoon. Chloe realized with a sickening thud that her precious soft life aesthetic was completely dead and buried. She marched across the stage and shoved Marcus hard right in the middle of his chest. She screamed that she absolutely hated him and that he was a pathetic, broke loser who had selfishly destroyed her entire future. Marcus tried to grab her hands, begging her to calm down and remember the innocent baby she was carrying. But Chloe yanked her hands away violently, as if his touch was physically burning her skin. She yelled that she was not going to raise her child in a homeless shelter because her husband was a complete failure. She told him right there that she was filing for a permanent divorce the very next morning. She turned her back on him, completely joining her angry parents and leaving him entirely isolated alone on the stage. Marcus was completely broken. In the short span of 20 minutes, he had lost his luxury home, his fake wealth, his adoring aunt, his wealthy in-laws, and his demanding wife. He was surrounded by enemies and staring down the dark barrel of multiple serious felony fraud charges. He looked out into the thinning crowd, desperately searching for a sympathetic face to offer him a lifeline, but he found nothing but cold rejection. Jasmine glared at him with righteous vindication, feeling a lifetime of emotional wounds finally begin to heal, while the remaining guests looked at him with deep disgust. He had burned every bridge he ever crossed, and now he was stranded on an island of his own terrible making. He slowly turned his head and looked directly at me. I was standing perfectly still near the edge of the stage, watching the total destruction of his world, with a calm, detached expression. I had warned him for years about his reckless behavior and his endless, insatiable greed. I had tried to teach him the value of hard work and honest money, but he chose the path of manipulation and theft. Now, the massive bill had finally come due, and there was absolutely no one left around to pay it but him as he stood there facing his total ruin. Marcus slowly walked toward me, his legs trembling violently. He dropped heavily onto both of his knees right in front of me, pressing his face into his hands as he began to sob uncontrollably, like a lost, terrified child. He begged me for mercy and forgiveness, his voice cracking and incredibly pathetic. He cried that he was so sorry for everything he had done to me and to Aunt Loretta. He pleaded with me to use my wealth and connections to save him from prison and bankruptcy. He swore he would change his life and be the perfect son if I gave him one more chance to make things right. He grabbed the hem of my emerald green dress, his tears staining the expensive fabric, babbling about how much he needed his mother. He told me he was scared and that he did not know what to do or where to go because he had nothing left in the world. He promised to work any job and pay back every penny he ever stole if I would just protect him from the angry people screaming at him. He was no longer the arrogant, entitled man demanding the deed to my paid-off house. He was just a very terrified, broken boy, finally realizing that all his terrible actions have massive, devastating consequences forever. I looked down at the weeping man kneeling at my feet. I looked at the imported white roses, the melting baby carriage ice sculpture, and the empty champagne glasses. It was a monument to his vanity and endless greed. I felt no pity and no desire to save him from the consequences of his choices. A mother is supposed to protect her children from the dangers of the world, but she cannot protect them from themselves when they choose to become the danger. I took a deliberate step back, pulling the fabric of my dress out of his grasping hands. I leaned forward slightly, ensuring my voice carried over his loud sobbing so that everyone remaining could hear my final judgment. I told him he had made his selfish choices, and now he had to live with the harsh reality of those decisions every single day. I paused, letting the silence wrap around his trembling shoulders like a thick winter coat. "You wanted me to move into a tiny apartment," I asked, my voice incredibly smooth and chillingly calm, without a single trace of emotion. "Good news. I just recently signed a brand new lease for a very small one-bedroom apartment right in the rough side of town today. But it is not for me. It is for you." The morning after the disastrous baby shower, my large 5-bedroom house was incredibly quiet. The heavy silence was no longer a source of comfort, but a stark reminder of the massive family destruction that had occurred the previous day. I sat at my kitchen island, drinking a cup of black coffee and looking out at my beautiful rose garden. I felt a profound sense of peace mixed with a lingering sadness. I had officially cut the toxic ties that had been suffocating me for decades. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, I picked up my phone and called my corporate attorney, Jonathan. I told him it was time to proceed with the final phase of our plan. I instructed him to take the forged power of attorney documents and the fake property appraisal directly to the district attorney. I was officially filing criminal fraud charges against my only son. Jonathan asked me one last time if I was absolutely certain about this drastic course of action. He reminded me that Marcus could face several years in a state penitentiary for attempting to defraud a major financial institution using forged legal documents. I kept my voice perfectly steady and told him to file the papers immediately. A mother is supposed to protect her child from danger, but when her child becomes a danger to her very survival, she must protect herself. I had spent 32 years shielding Marcus from the harsh consequences of his reckless behavior, and it only turned him into an entitled criminal. The only way he would ever learn how to be a responsible man was to face the absolute maximum penalty of the law. Jonathan agreed and hung up the phone, setting the legal hammer into motion. Later that same afternoon, I received a phone call from the front gate of my neighborhood. A process server was trying to deliver a thick stack of legal documents to my front door. I authorized the entry and waited calmly on my porch. The server handed me a heavy envelope stamped with the logo of a highly expensive downtown law firm. I went back inside and opened the package, spreading the crisp white pages across my mahogany dining table. It was a formal civil lawsuit filed by Richard on behalf of his pregnant daughter, Chloe. The sheer arrogance of this man was absolutely astounding. Despite knowing that he was 4 months behind on his commercial rent and facing imminent eviction, he still believed he could intimidate me with a frivolous legal threat. The lawsuit accused me of intentional infliction of emotional distress, claiming that my public announcement at the baby shower had caused Chloe severe psychological trauma and endangered her unborn child. Richard was demanding $1 million in compensatory damages for his daughter's public humiliation and ruined reputation. He thought he could use the legal system to bully me into a massive financial settlement, hoping the money would save his own failing consulting business from total bankruptcy. I read through the ridiculous, exaggerated claims and let out a soft, genuinely amused laugh. Richard was playing a dangerous game of checkers, while I was operating a masterful game of high-stakes chess. I immediately scanned the documents and emailed them directly to my corporate legal team at Apex Commercial Properties. I told Jonathan to completely crush them without any mercy or hesitation whatsoever. Jonathan did not hesitate for a single second. Within 48 hours, my holding company filed a massive counter lawsuit against Richard's consulting firm. We did not sue him for imaginary emotional distress. We sued him for cold, hard breach of commercial contract. The lawsuit detailed his failure to pay $120,000 in past due rent and requested immediate financial restitution for the remaining 6 years of his expensive 10-year penthouse lease. We also filed an emergency injunction to seize all of his corporate business assets, including his office furniture, his computer servers, and his remaining corporate bank accounts, to cover the massive outstanding debt. When the court granted the emergency injunction, Richard's entire fake empire completely collapsed overnight. The local authorities arrived at his prestigious downtown office building and physically locked the doors, preventing him from accessing his own failing company. His remaining clients panicked and immediately canceled their lucrative contracts. The public embarrassment of being evicted from a premium commercial building completely destroyed his professional reputation in the high society consulting world. Richard realized too late that you can never win a legal battle against a woman who holds all the actual financial leverage. The massive legal fees and the crushing debt from the commercial lease forced him to file for Chapter 7 corporate and personal bankruptcy by the end of the week. He lost his massive 6-bedroom mansion in the northern suburbs, and his country club membership was permanently revoked. He was completely and utterly ruined in every possible way a man could be ruined. While Richard's world was burning to the ground, the criminal justice system finally caught up with Marcus. 2 police officers arrived at the luxury downtown condo just as Marcus and Chloe were packing their belongings into cardboard boxes. The officers placed my son in heavy metal handcuffs right in the middle of his living room and read him his Miranda rights. They informed him that he was being officially charged with multiple counts of felony forgery and attempted bank fraud. Chloe watched in absolute horror as the police escorted her weeping husband out of the building and placed him into the back of a waiting squad car. She did not follow him to the police station. She did not call a bail bondsman or hire a criminal defense attorney to help him. Instead, she looked around the empty living room of the condo they were being evicted from and realized she was completely alone. Her luxury spa business was gone. Her wealthy, aesthetic lifestyle was a total lie. Her husband was a broke criminal facing years in prison, and her parents had just lost their entire fortune in a brutal bankruptcy proceeding. The soft life she had demanded from the universe had turned into an absolute nightmare. Chloe grabbed her 2 expensive designer suitcases and walked out of the condo, leaving the rest of her belongings behind. She called a cheap rideshare service because her leased luxury vehicle had already been repossessed by the dealership that morning. She had nowhere else to go but back to her ruined parents. Chloe arrived at the small rented apartment her parents had been forced to move into after losing their suburban mansion. The cramped space was completely filled with cheap cardboard boxes and the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of total defeat. Susan was sitting on a stained beige sofa, weeping quietly into a tissue, while Richard stared blankly at a muted television screen. Chloe dragged her suitcases into the tiny living room, her designer maternity dress looking completely absurd in the depressing environment. She announced that she was permanently leaving Marcus and filing for an immediate divorce. She blamed him entirely for the destruction of their family, completely refusing to take any responsibility for her own greed and manipulation. Richard did not even look at her. He simply nodded, slowly, completely broken by the realization that his arrogant behavior had cost him his entire legacy. Meanwhile, Marcus was sitting alone in a cold concrete holding cell at the county jail. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit, shivering in the damp air, and waiting for an arraignment hearing that would determine his fate. He used his 1 phone call to dial my number, begging the jail operator to connect him. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, displaying the caller identification of the local county correctional facility. I stood in my beautiful, quiet kitchen looking at the glowing screen. I did not feel angry anymore. I just felt a profound sense of finality. I let the phone ring until it finally went to voicemail, leaving Marcus completely alone to face his jail time. The silence in my home was absolute and incredibly beautiful. I walked over to the large bay windows and looked out at the vibrant neighborhood I had worked so hard to live in. Aunt Loretta had stopped calling me after realizing her precious nephew was a convicted felon in the making. My extended family had fractured into quiet whispers, no longer daring to demand anything from my accounts. Jasmine came over later that evening bringing a hot pizza and a bottle of sparkling water. We sat on the living room floor, eating out of the cardboard box and laughing together. We did not speak about Marcus or Chloe or Richard. We only talked about the bright, beautiful future ahead of us. Jasmine was expanding her veterinary clinic. I had reclaimed my kingdom, my wealth, and my absolute freedom. The storm was finally over, and my new dawn was incredibly bright and clear. It had been exactly 1 week since the explosion at the baby shower, and my home had finally returned to absolute tranquility. I was sitting in my living room reading when the front doorbell rang. I walked over and looked through the glass peephole. Standing on my porch was Aunt Loretta. She looked nothing like the loud woman who had screamed at me in front of the entire ballroom. She was not wearing her massive, colorful church hat, and her posture was completely slumped. She looked incredibly old and deeply exhausted. I unlocked the door and opened it slowly. Aunt Loretta did not barge in, demanding respect the way she normally did. She just stood there clutching her worn leather purse and looking down at her shoes. Tears were streaming quietly down her wrinkled face, falling onto the collar of her cotton dress. I stepped aside and told her she could come inside. Aunt Loretta walked into my quiet living room and sat down heavily on the edge of the sofa, afraid to take up too much space. She looked around the home she had tried to force me out of and let out a trembling sigh. I sat across from her, keeping my posture straight and expression neutral. For a long time, neither of us spoke a single word. Finally, she lifted her head, her voice cracked as she spoke. She told me she was incredibly sorry for everything she had done. She admitted she had been blinded by old-fashioned beliefs about men being the rightful heads of the household. She cried, confessing she spoiled Marcus, making endless excuses for his behavior because he was the only male child. She thought she was protecting him, but realized she had only turned him into a criminal who did not care about his family. I listened to her weep quietly without interrupting. Aunt Loretta wiped her eyes with a crumpled tissue, telling me the harsh reality of her stolen retirement funds had completely broken her heart. She said the absolute worst part was not losing the money, but realizing that the boy she loved more than anything in the world had looked her right in the eyes and lied to her for 5 solid years. She begged me to forgive her for calling me stingy and selfish. She said she now understood that my firm discipline was the only actual love Marcus had ever received, and she had ruined my efforts by constantly slipping him cash and inflating his massive ego. She dropped her head back down, sobbing loudly, and telling me she did not want to die alone and alienated from the only real family she had left. I watched her cry, feeling pity and frustration. I leaned forward, resting my hands on my knees. I told Aunt Loretta I finally forgave her for the terrible, harsh words she said. Holding on to anger would only poison my peace of mind, and I refused to let Marcus destroy our family. Aunt Loretta looked up, her eyes shining with fragile hope. I raised my hand, stopping her. I told her my forgiveness did not mean our relationship was going back to normal. I laid out my boundaries. She was warmly welcome for family holidays, but she was absolutely never allowed to raise her voice at me again. She was never allowed to discuss Marcus in my presence or ask for any assistance. If she ever disrespected Jasmine, she would be permanently banned from my life. She nodded vigorously, crying and agreeing to every single condition immediately, without any hesitation. The morning I drove downtown to meet my attorney, Jonathan forgiving Aunt Loretta was about finding personal peace, but dealing with Marcus required absolute legal precision. I sat in his conference room and instructed him to pull up all my estate planning documents, my private trusts, and my last will. It was time to break the generational curse that had poisoned our family for decades. I told him to formally disinherit Marcus from every single asset I owned. I removed his name from my insurance policies, real estate portfolios, and health directives. I made sure there was absolutely no legal loophole that would allow him to claim even a single penny of my wealth after I was gone. Jonathan drafted the documents, and I signed them with a steady hand, feeling an incredible weight lift off my shoulders. Marcus demanded his inheritance early, and he received exactly what he deserved. Nothing. But I was not just focused on taking things away. I had a massive amount of capital sitting in the private trust account that was originally designated for Marcus. It was millions of dollars in liquid assets and prime commercial real estate equity. I looked at Jonathan and smiled a genuine, excited smile. I told him I wanted to take every single dime of that money and completely redirect it toward the one child who had actually earned my respect and admiration. I wanted to build an empire for Jasmine. For years, Jasmine had worked herself to the bone in a tiny, cramped veterinary clinic, constantly stressed about outdated equipment and limited space. She had paid her own way through medical school and never once asked me for a massive handout. It was time to reward her absolute dedication and hard work. I instructed Jonathan to use the funds from the newly dissolved trust to purchase prime commercial real estate in the most prestigious part of the city. I told him to hire the very best local architectural firm to design a state-of-the-art, multi-million-dollar veterinary hospital completely customized to Jasmine's specifications. I wanted the facility to have the latest surgical equipment, luxury recovery suites for the animals, and a massive dedicated wing for rescue rehabilitations. I wanted to give her the absolute best professional foundation possible, because she actually deserved it. I spent the next several weeks secretly working with general contractors and medical suppliers to bring the beautiful grand vision to life. I poured my whole heart into the massive project, channeling all the negative energy I used to waste on constantly worrying about Marcus into building a bright, beautiful future for my incredible young daughter. When the final legal deeds for the brand new veterinary hospital were fully completed, I placed them in a beautiful leather folder. I invited Jasmine over for a quiet Sunday dinner. Just the two of us. I cooked all her favorite meals without any of the usual family drama ruining the atmosphere. After we finished eating, I handed her the heavy leather folder and told her to open it. Jasmine looked confused, but she slowly pulled out the thick stack of legal papers. She read the bold print detailing the multi-million-dollar commercial property and the fully funded hospital construction accounts. All of the documents were legally placed entirely in her name. Jasmine gasped, pressing both hands over her mouth as tears sprang to her eyes. She looked up at me completely stunned, shaking her head and quietly whispering that it was far too much money. I reached across the table and held her hands tightly. I told her that she had spent her entire life standing in the shadows while the family foolishly worshipped a boy who only caused destruction. I told her that she was the true legacy of this family. She was the one who embodied hard work, integrity, and pure unconditional love. I told her I was incredibly proud to be her mother, and that this new hospital was not a handout, but an absolute investment in a woman I knew would change the world. Jasmine stood up and hugged me tighter than she ever had before, crying tears of absolute joy and overwhelming gratitude. It was the most beautiful, perfect moment of my entire life. The generational curse of favoring the golden child was permanently broken, and a new era of true family support had finally begun. Later that night, after Jasmine went home, I sat in my living room, enjoying the absolute silence. I sipped herbal tea, watching the moonlight filter through the bay windows. Suddenly, the peace was interrupted by the harsh ringing of my cell phone resting on the coffee table. I picked up the phone and looked at the glowing screen. The caller identification displayed a strange prepaid number. I swiped the screen to accept the call, placing the phone to my ear without saying a word. An automated voice filled the dark, silent room, announcing a collect call from an inmate at the county correctional facility. Then I clearly heard Marcus speaking frantically on the other end. His panicked voice echoed against the hard concrete walls. He was calling from a prepaid jail phone, begging and crying for me to send bail money because the fraud charges were completely ruining his life. The heavy steel doors of the county correctional facility slammed shut behind me with a loud, echoing thud that reverberated through the cold concrete hallway. I stood in the visitor processing room, wearing a simple but elegant tailored beige suit, projecting an aura of complete calm and absolute authority. The air inside the building was stale and smelled faintly of harsh industrial bleach and lingering despair. It was a stark contrast to the beautiful, bright morning I had left behind outside. I walked up to the thick, bulletproof glass window and handed my government identification to the exhausted guard sitting on the other side. He processed my information without saying a single word and pointed me toward a heavy metal detector. After clearing the security checkpoint, I was escorted down a long, narrow corridor lined with fluorescent lights that flickered inconsistently overhead. My heels clicked rhythmically against the scuffed linoleum floor, creating a steady beat that matched the slow, steady rhythm of my heart. I did not feel nervous or anxious. I did not feel the crushing maternal guilt that used to consume my every waking moment. I only felt a profound sense of absolute clarity today, forever right now. I was finally closing the darkest chapter of my entire life. I entered the visitation room and took a seat in a hard plastic chair, facing a thick wall of reinforced, smudged glass. There were a few other visitors in the room speaking in hushed, desperate tones through the black plastic telephone receivers attached to the walls. I waited patiently for exactly 10 minutes before a heavy steel door on the opposite side of the glass buzzed loudly and swung open. 2 correctional officers escorted Marcus into the small, restricted booth. He looked absolutely terrible. The bright orange jumpsuit hung loosely over his frame, and his hair was completely unkempt. The arrogant, confident businessman who had stood in my dining room demanding my house was entirely gone, replaced by a broken, terrified man who finally looked exactly his age. He sat down heavily in the chair across from me and picked up his telephone receiver with trembling hands. I picked up my receiver and held it to my ear, waiting for him to speak first. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking immediately as tears welled up in his tired eyes. "Thank you so much for coming. I knew you would not just abandon me here in this terrible place. I am so incredibly sorry for everything. I really am. I have had a lot of time to think about what happened, and I realize I made some very bad mistakes. Please, you have to help me get out of here. The food is completely awful, and the other inmates are terrifying. You have to hire a good defense lawyer for me and post my bail. Please, Mom. I am begging you." I looked at him through the thick, smudged glass, keeping my face entirely devoid of emotion. I did not offer him a warm, reassuring smile, and I certainly did not tell him that everything was going to be perfectly fine. "You did not make bad mistakes, Marcus," I corrected him, my voice completely steady and perfectly calm. "Dropping a glass of water on the floor is a mistake. Forging my legal signature to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars from a commercial bank is a calculated felony. Siphoning money from your elderly aunt's retirement account for 5 consecutive years is a deliberate act of profound cruelty. You are not sitting in that chair because you made a simple mistake. You are sitting in that chair because you finally got caught living a massive, destructive lie." Marcus pressed his free hand against the thick glass, his face twisting into a mask of desperate, intense panic. "But I am your son," he cried out loudly, drawing the brief attention of the other visitors in the room. "I am your only son, Mom. You are supposed to protect me unconditionally. Family is supposed to stick together no matter what happens. You have all that money hidden away in those massive corporate accounts. You can easily afford to fix this whole situation for me right now today. You can pay off the bank and hire the absolute best legal team in the state to get these criminal charges dropped. You cannot just leave your own flesh and blood to rot in a cold concrete prison cell. I am the man of our family. You have to save me." I listened to his desperate, pathetic manipulation, feeling absolutely nothing but a deep, profound sense of weary disgust. He was still trying to use the exact same toxic rhetoric that Aunt Loretta had weaponized against our family for decades. He truly believed that his biology gave him an unrestricted lifetime pass to abuse, manipulate, and steal from the women who loved him. I took a deep, slow breath and looked directly into his panicked, tear-filled eyes. "I am going to explain something to you very clearly, Marcus," I said, projecting my voice with cold, undeniable authority so he could hear every single word I spoke. "Family is not a blank check. Family is not a free pass to commit serious financial crimes without facing any consequences. Real family is built on a solid foundation of mutual respect, honesty, and genuine unconditional support. I tried to give you those things for your entire life. I tried to teach you how to be a responsible, independent man, but you completely rejected every single lesson I ever offered you. You looked down on your sister because she worked hard for her money while you expected everything to simply be handed to you on a silver platter." I continued, my voice rising slightly with righteous indignation. "You married a woman who valued a fake luxury aesthetic over building a real, authentic life. You sat at my dining room table eating the food I cooked for you while you secretly plotted to drain my life savings and steal the home I built with your late father. You did not care if I ended up completely homeless as long as you got to keep driving your leased luxury cars and pretending to be a wealthy executive. "Mom, please stop," Marcus sobbed, his shoulders shaking violently as he pressed his forehead against the cold, reinforced glass. "I cannot take this anymore. I need you." "You do not need me, Marcus," I replied, cutting him off completely. "You never actually needed me. You never wanted a mother who would guide you and hold you accountable for your terrible actions. You only wanted an automated teller machine that dispensed endless amounts of cash to fund your absolute delusions. And when that machine finally stopped dispensing money, you tried to completely destroy it. Well, I am here today to deliver one final message to you. The machine is broken. The automated teller machine is permanently closed, and the vault is completely empty. There is absolutely no more money for you. There are no more bailouts, no more second chances, and no more free passes. You are going to sit in this prison, and you are going to face the full legal consequences of your deeply selfish actions." Marcus stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, finally realizing that his ultimate manipulation tactic had completely failed. The invisible cord that had tied me to his endless cycle of destruction was officially and permanently severed. He opened his mouth to beg again, but I did not give him the opportunity. I stood up from the hard plastic chair, smoothing out the wrinkles in my elegant beige suit. I looked down at him one last time, feeling the final heavy burden of my maternal guilt completely wash away from my spirit. I placed the black plastic telephone receiver back onto the metal hook, silencing his pathetic, desperate apologies forever. I turned my back to the thick glass window and walked directly toward the heavy steel exit doors. I did not look back even once. I could hear him sobbing loudly behind me, pounding his fists weakly against the glass partition, but the sound no longer held any power over my heart or my mind. I walked back down the long, narrow, fluorescent corridor, passing through the heavy metal security checkpoints, with my head held high, completely free. I pushed open the massive front doors of the county correctional facility and stepped out into the beautiful, bright morning. The warm sunlight washed over my face. I unlocked my car door and slid into the comfortable leather driver's seat. I drove away, leaving my toxic past behind. Suddenly, my phone rang. It was a video call from my brilliant daughter, Jasmine. She appeared on the screen, standing outside in the sunshine, beaming with absolute, overwhelming joy. She proudly held up a shiny new set of silver keys. "I am at the new clinic, Mom," she shouted very happily today. 6 months passed since the devastating collapse of my son's massive web of lies. It was a beautiful, crisp autumn morning in Atlanta when I pulled my car into the newly paved parking lot of the Apex Veterinary Hospital. The building stood tall and proud against the bright blue sky. It was a massive state-of-the-art facility featuring floor-to-ceiling glass windows and a beautiful brick facade that perfectly matched the architectural style of our historic neighborhood. Today was the official grand opening of Jasmine's brand new clinic, and the energy in the air was absolutely electric. I parked my car and walked toward the main entrance, feeling a deep, profound sense of pride swelling inside my chest. Dozens of people were already gathered outside the front doors, holding cups of warm coffee and chatting excitedly. The local news station had even sent a small camera crew to cover the event because Jasmine's clinic was the largest minority-owned veterinary hospital in the entire district. I walked through the crowd and spotted Jasmine standing near the entrance. She was wearing a beautiful, tailored navy blue suit that perfectly complemented her radiant smile. She looked absolutely stunning, projecting the confidence and grace of a true leader. When she saw me, she immediately excused herself from a conversation with a local city councilman and rushed over to give me a massive, tight hug. "Thank you so much for coming, Mom," she whispered, her voice thick with genuine emotion. I pulled back and looked at her, shaking my head gently. "I would not have missed this day for anything in the entire world, Jasmine," I told her. "You built this beautiful reality with your own 2 hands and your incredibly hard work. I am just so unbelievably proud of the remarkable woman you have become." Jasmine smiled brightly and grabbed my hand, leading me toward the front doors, where a large red ribbon was stretched across the entrance, waiting to be cut. As we walked toward the front of the building, I noticed a familiar face standing in the front row of the crowd. It was Aunt Loretta. She was wearing a modest floral dress and a simple sweater, completely abandoning her usual massive, flashy church hats. When she saw Jasmine approaching, she immediately started clapping loudly, her face beaming with genuine pride. "Look at our beautiful, brilliant doctor," Aunt Loretta announced to the women standing next to her. "That is my niece, and she is the absolute pride and joy of this entire family." I watched Aunt Loretta interact with Jasmine and realized just how drastically the family dynamic had shifted over the past 6 months. Jasmine was no longer the forgotten scapegoat forced to stand in the shadows while everyone worshipped a deeply flawed boy. She was finally being celebrated as the true star of the family. The golden child pedestal had been completely destroyed and replaced by a foundation of actual respect and genuine admiration for hard work. The ceremony began with a beautiful, heartfelt speech from the city mayor praising Jasmine's incredible dedication to animal welfare and her massive contribution to the local community. Then Jasmine took the microphone and thanked everyone for their unwavering support. She spoke eloquently about her difficult journey through medical school and the massive sacrifices she made to reach this incredible milestone. She looked directly at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears, and thanked me for believing in her vision when nobody else would. The crowd erupted into loud, enthusiastic applause as Jasmine took a pair of giant silver scissors and cut the thick red ribbon, officially opening the hospital to the public. I stood there clapping until my hands actually hurt, feeling an overwhelming sense of joy and absolute vindication. This was the beautiful legacy I had always wanted to build, a legacy rooted in honesty, integrity, and pure, authentic success. The generational curse was finally broken forever. While Jasmine's life was soaring to incredible new heights, Marcus was experiencing a completely different reality. He did not go to a state penitentiary, but he did not escape punishment entirely. His public defender managed to negotiate a strict plea deal with the district attorney just days before his criminal trial was scheduled to begin. Marcus pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges of attempted bank fraud and criminal forgery. The judge sentenced him to 5 long years of highly restrictive supervised probation and ordered him to pay massive legal fines and mandatory financial restitution. Because he was now a convicted corporate felon, he was completely blacklisted from the professional business world. No reputable company would ever hire a man who forged legal documents to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars. He lost his expensive tailored suits, his luxury leased vehicles, and his fake high society status. He was completely stripped of his entire manufactured identity. Today, my former golden child son wakes up at 4 o'clock in the morning to catch a public city bus. He works a grueling minimum wage job in the sweltering warehouse of a massive industrial shipping facility. He spends 10 hours a day lifting heavy cardboard boxes and loading cargo trucks until his hands are blistered and his back constantly aches. He lives in a tiny, cramped room in a cheap boarding house located in a very dangerous part of town. He has absolutely no disposable income and spends every single weekend meeting with his strict parole officer or attending mandatory financial counseling sessions. He is completely isolated from the wealthy friends he used to impress. The reality of his massive downfall is a heavy, suffocating burden he must carry every single day. He thought he could steal his way to a luxury lifestyle, but he ended up trading his absolute freedom for a minimum wage existence. Chloe also learned a very harsh lesson about the incredibly high cost of pure greed and manipulation. When her parents, Richard and Susan, filed for complete corporate and personal bankruptcy, their entire world completely imploded. The massive financial stress and the public humiliation destroyed their marriage completely. They sold off their remaining personal assets to pay their massive legal debts and abruptly moved to a completely different state, leaving Chloe entirely behind. They blamed her for bringing Marcus into their lives and completely cut off all contact with her. Chloe was left absolutely alone and completely broke right before her baby was born. The soft life aesthetic she had desperately demanded from the universe had vanished into thin air. Without my house to steal, and without her parents' massive financial safety net, she was finally forced to face the harsh, unforgiving reality of the real world she had avoided for so long. Chloe now lives in a rundown trailer park on the very outskirts of the city. She is a single mother raising her baby in a cramped, noisy environment, completely devoid of any luxury or comfort. She works long, exhausting shifts as a cashier at a local discount grocery store, struggling every single month just to buy basic necessities like baby formula and cheap diapers. Her expensive designer maternity gowns have been replaced by cheap, faded uniform shirts and sensible walking shoes. She has absolutely no relationship with Marcus, who completely blames her for pushing him to commit the financial crimes in the first place. They are forever bound together by the child they share, but they absolutely despise each other. They tried to build a beautiful life on a foundation of massive lies, and the universe ultimately handed them the exact miserable existence they truly deserved all along. Later that evening, I sat alone on the front porch of my beautiful paid-off 5-bedroom house, watching the glorious golden sun slowly set below the distant horizon. The evening air was incredibly warm and comforting. I held a glass of sweet iced tea in my hand, listening to the gentle evening breeze rustle through the leaves of the old oak trees. My massive home was perfectly quiet, but it no longer felt empty or lonely. It felt like a true sanctuary, completely free from the toxic, heavy drama that used to suffocate me. I took a slow, deep breath and smiled, reflecting on the incredibly difficult but deeply necessary journey I had just survived. It took 32 years to finally reach this beautiful point of absolute clarity and total inner peace. I looked out across my perfectly manicured front lawn, feeling an overwhelming sense of pure, absolute gratitude wash entirely over my entire weary soul. I lost a son, but I gained my freedom, and I finally saw my daughter. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic golden child to protect your own peace? Tell me your personal stories in the comments below. Please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and share this video with anyone who genuinely needs the courage to set strict family boundaries today. Thank you for watching carefully.